I'd like to call our meeting together. I know we've had some traffic issues today on 35 and also on 183. David, is our speakers here?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, good. All right. I don't know whether Mary, do you know, are we missing anybody that we expected?
Actually, Ray Mays is supposed to come, I think. Oh, here we go, Ray. No, actually, Ray Mays is not available to attend. And Dr. Hodo is supposed to be here.
Okay, so we're just missing one then.
Right.
Okay.
And Jerry Brown.
Yeah. So that we can stay on schedule. We have a very busy day. We need to be out of here by 1 o'clock. So hopefully he'll be able to join us. With that, welcome. And for our meeting today, each of you has a packet containing the agenda for today's meeting, the minutes from our meeting on August 19th, the bios of our presenters from outside the coordinating board, hard copies of the presentations, and a worksheet of proposed workforce marketable skills goal and some examples of marketable skills targets for the next higher education plan. The coordinating board staff assembled this worksheet to stimulate our discussion about a possible workforce goal for the plan and related measurable targets that will define the state's progress toward meeting the goal, if we ultimately recommend a workforce goal. In terms of our agenda today, after the approval of the minutes from our August 19th meeting, we'll hear from Dr. Mark Schneider, Vice President Institute Fellow for the American Institute for Research, about the marketable skills college graduates need. After our discussions with Dr. Schneider, we'll hear from Dr. Randy Dial, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin, on the importance of the liberal arts in preparing students for the working world and how UT Austin is addressing the workforce skills of liberal arts students. Directly after that presentation and our initial discussions with him, we'll take a short break with Deputy Commissioner Gardner, Assistant Commissioner Brown, and members of the Coordinating Board's Planning and County staff to provide an overview and lead us in discussions of a possible workforce goal and related measurable example targets for the next long-range strategic plan for Texas higher education. This overview and discussion will continue over our working lunch. Finally, as requested by the committee at the August meeting, members of the Coordinating Board's Planning and Accountability staff will provide us an update on data related to a possible student cost goal that we may want to consider for the next long-range higher education plan. And with that, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes, which I thought were very well done, very detailed, set a high standard. So we've got a motion to approve, a second. Motion made and second. Any opposed? If not, motion passes. Before I introduce Dr. Snyder, I want to provide a brief summary of our committee's discussions up to this point. As you know, we have been looking to the future to determine a strategic plan that inspires and advances student success, and a plan that will help position Texas as a leader in an increasingly complex and competitive world economy. With the exception of July, we've been meeting monthly ever since our inaugural meeting on March 6th. So this is our on March 3rd. This is our sixth meeting. Each of our meetings, time flies, doesn't it? Each of our meetings has had a strategic focus and has featured experts from higher education and the workforce, including our consultant, Dr. Steve Murdoch, on the implications of population change in Texas for education and economic development, Acting Director Andreas Sliker of the OECD on international benchmarking, Research Director Jeff Stroll of the Georgetown University Center on Education and Workforce on education and the workforce, Senior Vice Provost David Laude of the University of Texas at Austin on strategies and programs for increasing the educational achievement of economically disadvantaged students, President William Serrata of the El Paso Community College on overcoming the challenges faced in addressing the needs of economically disadvantaged students, President Stan Jones of Colleen College America on helping students achieve a degree, and Professor Sandy Baum of George Washington University and Senior Fellow of the Urban Institute on college access and affordability. Today we'll hear from Vice President Mark Snyder of the American Institute for Research about marketable skills college graduates need. And from Dr. Randy Dial of the University of Texas at Austin on the importance of liberal arts in preparing students for the working world. Based on our discussions and questions, and to further assist us with our committee work, members of the coordinating bench staff will provide us with some overview. And so as we've considered, I want to just go over the goals that we've kind of agreed on, or we've at least discussed that we might agree on, and so I'll lay those out kind of as a summary of where we are. By 2030, at least 60% of Texans aged 25 to 34 will have a post-secondary credential or degree of value in the workplace. By 2030, at least 550,000 students will complete a certificate or an associate, bachelor's, or master's degree from a Texas public, independent, or for-profit college or university. And to accomplish the first goal of 60%, we have to be able to accomplish the second goal, although I think we still need to spend some time on understanding the math of how we get there. By 2030, all award recipients, and now we're going to move into where we've had less of an agreement or discussion on. By 2030, all award recipients from Texas public institutions of higher education will graduate from programs with identifiable, marketable skills. And by 2030, the average undergraduate student loan debt of graduates from Texas public universities and colleges will be no greater than a yet-to-be-defined percentage of the average first-year wage for the graduates. A draft of the proposed higher education plan is scheduled to be considered by the coordinating board in July 2015. But before that, the goal is to provide opportunity for key stakeholders, including the general public, to provide input into the proposed plan. Coordinating board will be utilizing an online town hall website called College Town Hall Texas, where participants are able to register feedback in an online format. Coordinating board also will be utilizing interactive workshops at the 2014 Texas Higher Education Leadership Conference to secure feedback from regents, trustees, chancellors, presidents, other higher education leaders. This is to be held in Austin, the Doubletree, at November 20th and 21st. And particularly the second day, the 21st, is recommended for members of this committee if you're available. The committee will also work closely with the Texas legislature, including the 2036 Commission, if and when appointed, to ensure a high degree of alignment between the committee's work and that of the legislature. In fact, yesterday, Commissioner Paredes, Assistant Commissioner Brown, and myself invited testimony to the House Committee on Higher Education on the work we are doing to develop the next long-range plan for the next higher education committee. And my sense of that at that meeting is we've got this role between a political view that is kind of limited to the term in office and the next election, and our view, which at least to me needs to be kind of the keeper of the vision of what a highly competitive workforce and a very successful post-secondary attainment vision or future looks like. And so with that, unless members have any questions, I'd like to begin our discussion today by introducing Mark Snyder. Dr. Snyder is the Vice President, and as I've said this is probably the third time, Fellow for American Institute of Research. Prior to joining AIR, Dr. Snyder served as Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics. He's a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and a distinguished Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the State University of New York, Stony Brook. Dr. Snyder is the author of numerous articles and books on education policy. In 2013, he was recognized by the Chronicle of Higher Education as one of the 10 people in the nation who had the largest effect on post-secondary education policy. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Snyder.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. I always love being here. I find that the work you do in Texas, I work with a lot of folks is actually remarkable in terms of its progressivity and the seriousness with which you treat your students and the goals of higher education. And I commend you for all of that. I also find that your innovations and your willingness to innovate is also remarkable. And just from my perspective as a person who cares a lot about data, I know that people keep saying Florida has the best data system in the country. You do, without any question. The state of Texas is really commendable on many dimensions, and the willingness to share your data and to use your data to help other people understand what's going on in the state is also commendable, and I truly appreciate that. But I wasn't here. I haven't been invited here to congratulate you. I'm here to tell you my perspective on wages and why this is an appropriate concern, and what kind of skills might lead to marketable students, which is ultimately what students care about, and ultimately what many people care about. Are students going to graduate? Are they going to graduate on time? Are they going to make enough money to pay off whatever debt they accumulate? Are they going to be productive members of society? And that, I think, is ultimately what we're all concerned about. So skills matter. I mean, I don't think there's any question about it. So they matter because of wages, okay? And there's certain skills correlate with high wages. And a lot of the work that I did in the last few years was on early wages, in part because data systems linking student unit records to wage data were in their infancy. And a lot of the work I'll show you started with a focus on earnings 18 months after graduation. A lot of people rightfully complained that this perspective was too short. So using data from Texas 10 years out and from Tennessee 5 years out and other states, we could see again that the persistent relationship between certain skills, certain majors, certain training, and wages persists over time. It's not that one day you end up with a degree that pays low. On average, we're talking about averages. It's student experience varies. One day you wake up and you're getting paid $35,000 a year, and 10 years later you're making $150,000 a year. If you start low, you usually end low. But wages matter, and the skill level affects wages. There's a growing concern about underemployment now. So we know, for example, that even in the tough economic times that we've had since 2008, the unemployment rate of graduates is lower than the unemployment rate of students without college degrees, but now we're increasingly concerned with underemployment. That is, that students have spent time accumulating skills that they are not having the opportunity to use. Well, it turns out, by the way, that in a recent study by PayScale, and I'll show you some of the results in a few minutes, when students are asked if they feel underemployed, and large numbers of students feel underemployed, the primary reason that they say they're underemployed is because they're not getting paid a lot. So I think if you're getting paid a lot of money and you're not using your entire brain or all the skills that you learned while in college, there's compensation if you're making a lot of money. But the fact of the matter is that we are concerned with underemployment as well as unemployment, and underemployment, again, I'll show in a few minutes, is related to certain kinds of skills. And what I'm talking about, and what I'm going to do is correlate skills and majors, which is the way most people think about it. So we know what we really don't know, and we need to talk about that. What are the skills that people are supposed to have? What are the skills they have? How do we measure those? But right now, what we're doing is we're looking at the majors that students have, and we're inferring the kinds of skills that students have or don't have, right? And then this is an issue that as parents or grandparents, we all are really concerned about. We want our kids to launch adult lives, right? We want them launched. We want them to have successful careers. We don't want them coming back and living in our basement after we send them off to college, and all of a sudden, now you have a 22-year-old, post-adolescent son, with all those problems, or daughter, living in the basement that or worse yet, they reclaim their bedroom that you had just turned into a beautiful multimedia room with, 48, 65-inch TV and all that kind of stuff, and all of a sudden your son is now parked in there and like, I want to watch TV. No, sorry, this is my room now. Yeah, right. We all know this, right? I paid my daughter a year's stipend not to move back into my house, and it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. You know, I could do it, and I did it. I think I trained her too well because I still give her money, and even though she's a successful attorney, she still thinks I still owe her. But skills matter because because the wages, because of the underemployment, and because of the failure to launch. We want to prevent the failure to launch. I joke about this, but it's a sad story because it's really true, right? I mean, we really do want. I mean, on one hand, we do want our kids obviously to launch into good lives, and we want them to have the skills to be able to do that. But having them not launch is very costly. So here's one of the fundamental lessons in all the work that I've been doing, and that is that we have tended to treat community colleges and two-year technical degrees as education bastards, right? They're stepchildren of the higher education system, and I think as a nation we've made a fundamental mistake in constantly talking about higher education is a 4-year bachelor's degree, right? The percentage of people who correlate post-secondary education or higher education with a bachelor's degree is enormous. And we've tended to treat community colleges as stepchildren, as also-rans, and the fact of the matter is that two-year community colleges, look, I mean, so they have low graduation rates, and there are lots of reasons why they have low graduation rates, but the fact of the matter is that the technical side of community colleges are often doing really good jobs, and they should be recognized and rewarded for that. So not everybody needs a bachelor's degree. Right? Students don't have the time, the money, the skills, the interest to get one. And for so many years, we've been telling students that this is what you have to do. You have to go to a 4-year degree. If you can't get into a 4-year degree, do a 2-year degree, then transfer to a 4-year degree. But the fact of the matter is that so many students should not be in 4-year institutions because they're not going to graduate. Right? They may not even finish the first year. They're going to accumulate debt. They're going to be remediation. They don't have the skills, the interest, the money, the time, the inclination to get a 4-year degree. And the technical side of the house in community colleges can be highly valuable as pathways into the workforce. I'll show you some evidence on that. So the bottom line is that short-term skills and career-oriented technical degrees can put students in the middle class, right? And that is a lesson that I don't think enough people understand. Okay? So in the long run, people with bachelor's degree, on average, people with bachelor's degrees are going to out-earn, on average, people with associate's degrees, right? This is all census data, right? We see this over and over again. So the bachelor's degree, on average, over the lifetime, is a more valuable degree. But our graduation rate from college is about 65%, okay? And from the regional campuses where most students go are 35, 40, 50%, right? And we're trying to squeeze too many people into academic 4-year institutions when we could put them, or we should try to, open up alternative pathways that will put them into the middle class. Again, the bachelor's degree on average is a more valuable degree than the associate's degree, but not in all cases and not for every student. So this is a little complicated, and I think you all have it in front of you. So this chart is the results from 6 states that I've worked with, including Texas, and this shows you what the average or the median first-year earnings are. So this is 18 months after graduation. 18 months after graduation. The question is, who is earning more money 18 months after graduation by the type of degree that they've earned? So let's start with Virginia. So in each case, I give the bachelor's degree, and in most states like Texas, you divide the associate's degrees into different flavors, if you will, right? So there's the technical, in Virginia, there's a technical associate's versus the bachelor's credit. So the technical associate is the degree that's aimed at giving people skills to enter the job market, and the bachelor's credit are transfer degrees. In Texas, you have the bachelor's, the technical associates, and the academic associates. Tennessee doesn't divide them. In Florida, there's the bachelor's degree, there's the associates of arts, the associates of arts and science, and the associates in applied science, right? In Colorado, they have the bachelor's, the AAS, and the associate of applied science, the associate of arts, the associates of science. Arkansas doesn't divide its associates. But if you look at which bar is circled, right? Only in Arkansas is not the highest paid graduate someone with an associate's degree. Yes, sir.
For clarification, when you say Virginia statewide bachelors, what you're saying is that these are the earnings of actual bachelor's degree earners in the state of Virginia, or associate's degrees who have transfer interest?
No. Okay. So the way these across all these states, these are UI wage data, the unemployment insurance wage data. So these are students that we find working in the state of Virginia or the state of Texas or whatever, right, that have met certain kinds of matching requirements. And this is 18 months after graduation. If they're found in the UI wage data, we know they got a bachelor's degree from the state, actually in Virginia, it's both public and not-for-profit institutions. And we know that 18 months after graduation, on average, they're making $36,000.
Okay. Thank you.
So on average, 18 months after graduation, the graduates with the technical associate's degrees are making more than that, $38,000. Okay, and the graduates, and this is the transfer associate degrees. These are students who are in the labor market, but they could also be going to school. So this could be depressing their wages. So there could be some downward pressure on that, and it's just hard to figure. It's just hard to figure that out. But the pattern is so consistent that technical associate degrees in the short run, right, the applied sciences, the technical associates in Texas, the technical associates degrees, these are good paying jobs, right? Graduates from these programs are finding positions with good wages. Now, we'll unpack these in a minute about, it's clearly not everybody's making a lot of money, so there's variation even in people getting these technical degrees, but the fact of the matter is that these degrees are valuable, and I think we need to understand that, we need to honor that, and we need to tell students that you don't need a four-year degree to be in the middle class. Right? Because the fact of the matter is that 1 year after graduation, the 38,000, the 50,000, the 38,000, these numbers are about or above the median family income. So people with these positions are in the middle class. So now we could start looking at the kinds of programs that lead to more higher paying positions, right? I don't know what, I want to be careful about saying these are more valuable or more lucrative, whatever, but these are the wages. So if you look at this table, anything in red is below the statewide average. So it's all benchmarked against the state performance standard, right? So for example, these are popular associate degrees in the state of Tennessee, and Tennessee reports first and fifth year. I report for Tennessee first and fifth year earnings on the 23rd of September. All this is going to be made public with a big rollout and all this. But anything in red here is below the state standard, right? The state benchmark. And you can see a couple of things. So the first thing you can see is that if you start low, you tend to end low, right? If you're below average in year one, 5 years later, you haven't shot up, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you look at the statewide bachelors and the statewide median associates, in year one, the median associate is above the bachelors. By year 5, they've caught up, but there's a minuscule difference between them at the end of 2 years. The other thing is, as I said, it's sort of start low or end low and end low. You know, it's, again, very few examples of majors going from below average to above average. And then there's this spectacular case of electrical engineering technologies and technicians with a 46% increase in median wages between year 1 and year 5. So these are so the lesson that I take from this is if you know how to fix things, that is, if you're in technology, you get rewarded. If you know how to fix people, you're rewarded. Right? So this is a table. The next one is the average wages for year 1 and year 10. And here I shift from associates to bachelor's degrees because the bachelor's degree is still the most popular degree, the most commonly granted degree in the nation. And as I said earlier, most people care the most. This is what their goal is. So again, the red is below average, below the state benchmark, and black is above the state benchmark. And we can see that for many of these, there are 10 programs here. So for 3 of them, you start low, you end low. Biology is a very interesting story. They start with the lowest wages of the 10 most popular bachelor's degree in the state of Texas, but end way above the average by year 10. And I suspect that that's because so many people are finally getting their medical degrees, and that's pushing up the wages. Psychology, very popular degree, very low, below average in this state and every other state. It's not a very lucrative degree. Marketing is like biology, goes from below to above. Multi and interdisciplinary studies, which in the state of Texas is a route into teaching, starts above, but doesn't go anyplace. And 10 years out, it's below the state median. The most in the state of Texas, almost everybody that's the highest paid of the most popular degrees are in marketing and business. And it pays. I mean, look at finance and financial management services. Of the 10 most popular, $95,000 annual wage. And as I said, marketing is slow to take off, but puts you way above the statewide average. Yes, Mr.
I have a question for you. Why don't you have engineering and some of the higher tech?
Because these are the most popular. If we were just doing like all the wages, yes, engineering is always the top, and in this state, not surprisingly, anything that has to do with petroleum engineering is the highest paid. But these are relatively small programs. So these are the most popular. These are the most popular programs. Okay, so that's wages. So again, fix people, fix things. You're going to get rewarded. Associate degrees, technical associate degrees pay off, and often pay off way more than some esoteric other courses, shall we say? So this is based on payscale.com. This is a compensation company that has something like 2 or 3 million students graduates who've given information to PayScale when they're looking to get some advice about what their compensation should be. So the way it works is you go on payscale.com, you put in some information about yourself, when you graduate, what degrees you got, something about your job history, what kind of job you're looking for, and where you're looking for it, and they'll say in Austin, Texas, someone with your skills should be getting paid $50,000, something like that. Their real business is, of course, advising companies about how much they should pay, but they get the data from students in this exchange for giving them guidance about what the baseline salary should be. So about a month ago, they put out a study about the college majors most and least likely to feel that they're unemployed. And on the yellow or the mustard colored are the most underemployed majors, and the least underemployed majors are on the blue. And actually coming back to Mr. Ferguson's point about engineering, look at almost all the ones that are the least underemployed are engineering, right? So people are engaged, they're being well compensated for their jobs. Mathematics is an area also.
Is this at some fixed time after graduation?
No, actually, I'm sorry. Their database, they divide their database by early career, mid-career, and I'm sorry, I don't remember if this is early career or mid-career. I'm sorry.
But the range is narrow. It looks like 40% of students feel like they're unemployed or underemployed no matter what.
No matter what, yeah. So this was, I mean, so that, no, that is true. So even environmental engineers, like more than a quarter of them feel underemployed, right? Well, there's a question of what their expectations are too, right? I mean, Okay, so if we go on the left-hand side, the most underemployed, we can see general studies, sociology, English language and literature, graphic design, liberal arts, education, psychology. Some of these are really big majors, right? Most of them are in the liberal arts and sciences, social sciences. And these are, again, psychology is one of the largest majors that we have, and half of them feel underemployed.
Can I ask a question about pay scale? When I've looked at them in the past, one thing that jumped out to me, and it wasn't the job satisfaction, but in terms of salaries, I noticed that if you looked at well-known liberal arts schools, that the starting salaries at schools without engineering, without business, were approximately the same as at large state schools with those same majors. In mid-career, the salaries were actually higher.
For the liberal arts school?
For the better known, so Amherst, Williams, right. Middlebury, Carleton, Pomona.
Right.
There's some other factor working there?
Yeah, so I believe, and again, so I believe that there's a handful of prestige schools in the United States, of which Rice, for example, is one of them, and 5% of American students go to these schools. And as someone who cares about students and as people who are charged with public institutions, I couldn't care less. Quite frankly, they're well endowed. I mean, we actually support them enormously through tax policy and through tax laws. But I tell you, what happens at Brownsville is way more important than what happens at Rice.
Well, the reason I'm asking is if there's anything they're doing aside from being more selective that might lead to this. There was an article in the Times recently in which they were mentioning Connecticut College, and I've visited there a few years ago, and I was impressed that from the day the students entered the campus, they were attending to the fact they needed to be employed when they graduated. And in fact, they really almost insisted that you have summer employment and internships, and they apparently have a fund where if it's an unpaid internship, they will pay you so that you can take the unfunded internship. So I was wondering if there's something that they're doing acknowledging that there may be the skills thing that could be employed at other types of institutions. I agree with what you just said, but if there's something there that we could use, I'm wondering.
Right. No, I think that's a great question. So I believe that we can find examples of small schools that have committed to doing things with regard to mentoring, for example, to keep students in school, that have done things like better career counseling. So there's always the question of the degree to which it could be scalable. But I think, and David, I believe this is the point, that there has to be a fundamental institutional commitment to this. So I was the chair at Stony Brook for 18 years of one of the largest majors in the country. In the college, and also one of the largest majors in the country. But for 18 years, right? Could I tell you what happened to any of my students? Well, I could tell you like the 3, 4, 5 students a year that went to graduate school in political science. I knew each one of them because they were like mini me's, right? I was, replicating them, or someone else in my department was replicating them, and we were going to be judged as a PhD granting program what happened to our students who went on to get PhDs. And I could tell you the students, the handful of students that went to prestigious law schools. And why could I tell you that? Because 5 years later I was going to ask them for money, right? So I tracked those students. But the other 280 students that we graduated every year or whatever it was, could I tell you if they learned anything? If they had jobs afterwards? I had no idea. Could I tell you if they had any skills, if they could read, if they could write, if they'd ever been in the library or, No. It was not, the ethos of the university was so different. It was a good research university, not a great research university, but a good, solid research university. And that it was not in the DNA of the school to worry about what happened to the undergraduates.
Having done some of this for a while, I don't disagree with this, but I don't sense that students didn't know this from the day they enter until the day they leave, and they have for the last 30 years.
Wait, they didn't
In other
know?
words, they know what's the lowest paying. Usually they're there because they couldn't cut the others, or because they had a passion for that, and they said, yeah, I'm not going to make what a electrical engineer will, but I want to help people, or I want to do such and such. So I sense that I don't know what we do in the sense that we say, well, you may want to be this, but we need you to make more money. You've got to go over here. That's not going to happen. It hasn't happened in 30 years. People self-select into these areas. Sometimes they default into them because they can't, their math skills aren't good enough, and so they start on engineering and they end up in sociology or psychology.
Right.
But if you ask anything other than maybe brand new freshmen, I can tell you, I'll go tonight and I'll talk to a bunch of mostly juniors, and I'll tell you, they'll tell you about the third thing they say is, I'm in such and such. I'm not going to make much money doing that, but that's what I'm in this because I like it, or da 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 da. So, this isn't new, is it?
I think look, I'm sorry, we reinvent the wheel all the time, right? And we rediscover, things that we've known for a long time. But I don't think that information is as clearly articulated and understood. Because if it was, so the link for me is really the issue of student borrowing, right? If students really understood this, would they be borrowing $100,000 to get a job paying $25,000? And even if you love what you're doing, right, you're not self-actualizing living in your mother's basement. You're going to have a really hard time if all you're doing is worrying about paying off your debts and your loans. You're going to have a problem. You're going to have a serious problem.
But don't we have pretty good data right now from across the country that, in fact, what you said they wouldn't do, they are doing?
Yeah, but I think
when you look at the debt distribution, which I've done recently, it's not just the people who are going to be electrical engineers that are in debt by $100,000. It's also bunches of kids in some of these other areas. And all I'm asking is or just raising the issue, is I really don't think that kids don't know by the time they're sophomores what is going to pay a lot of money, because they talk to one another, they check with their friends, etc. They might enter the first year, but sophomores and juniors, when I talk to them, when I sit down and advise them, they'll say, well, I know I'm not in a very good paying area, I'm not going to make much money, but da-da-da-da-da.
Right. So I think the question is, if that's the case, what are the skills that they need to maximize
within those areas?
Within those areas, right? And I'll come to that in a minute. But I think that is the right question ultimately, right? So from these data, we know that certain things are going to happen to you if you don't have the skills. And I agree. If you can't pass calculus, you're not going to become an engineer. If you can't pass biochemistry, you're not going to become a doctor, right? End of story. And part of the reason that the wage premium for something like mathematics occurs is because people who do mathematics have much more rigorous training than people who study psychology or sociology, quite frankly. So you're coming out into the market with a better set of skills. You're signaling that you're more disciplined. You've taken a more rigorous curriculum. And I believe that that's part of the wage premium in mathematics. Of course, people need mathematicians for all kinds of things, but I believe that part of what's happening with mathematics is that you're signaling that you're serious, that you've done a rigorous course of training.
Commissioner?
Well, I think Steve is right, but there's another phenomenon that occurs, and I was very familiar with it when I was a faculty member. I think that for probably the last 30, 40 years, UCLA has had more English majors than any university in the country. At one time, we had close to 2,000 English majors, and if you ask those students what the average wage was for an English major, they could tell you. But they were all going to be screenwriters, and they were going to make it big. So they knew what the wages were for the profession, but they thought they would be the exception. The same thing happens in graduate school. We would tell students, this is what the market is for PhDs in English, sociology, or whatever, but they thought they would be one of the exceptions, and they would get a plum job. That's the other thing that helps explain some of these numbers.
I mean, it's the same problem with graduation rates. You know, I mean, the University of District Columbia has a graduation rate of 19%. But every student I've ever talked to going there is going to be one of those 19%. Yeah. Right? I mean, you know, so people always believe that they're above average.
This discussion is right where we wanted to be today, because if you look at the goal, we're talking about how can we help students who graduate, whatever their major, to understand what marketable skills may be, what they have learned that is useful in the market if they decide to go in some different direction. How can institutions be more aware of this to help the students understand what their skills are, and in fact to help them put together a skill set, but still maintain the range of degrees, so that you know, Steve's sociology students will know, you know, that they can do things that aren't necessarily in social services, which many can't. I mean, many of them could be employed in marketing if they chose to. They have some of the very same skills that they may not realize it. Many of the students have very good communication skills, but nobody has ever told them that that's a marketable skill. And so part of that is to help the students identify, and I do think Steve is correct. I have a sociology major in my family right now who I'm thinking 2 years ahead. And so,
don't convert it.
But I think this is the type of thing we have to be more conscious of it, and I think students do understand these things. Online, if you go online much, there's all these ads at the beginning of the page, and I've seen and clicked on at least 50 times, here are the majors that will pay the least. And it's all these same majors,
right there.
and they always say, well, oh, gee, there's obviously a trend, which you sort of echoed. If you want to help people, you're not going to get paid much for it. And I think we need people to continue to do that. I mean, it's really important that it's there. But some of those people will become, administrators in those areas at some time. They will have some skills that even if they're not well paid, will help them do a better job at helping people if they want to. And so I think what we're trying to head to is how can we help students be more aware and help and talk to institutions about being more active and aggressive in terms of helping students understand what these things are. And I think we may hear about some of this later today, how schools can do that. But so this is focused very well on
on your task.
On our task and the questions. So keep these questions coming.
I'd just like to say one thing in that, and that's I've dealt with both kids in college and also mentor kids. You know, I say kids, they're still 28. I still say they're kids, although they don't think so. And I think it's just by the time they get to, I mean, they may tell you that they don't care what they're going to make while they're in college, but by the time they get to 30, I just call it a reality check. And at that point, then they begin to ask, well, how can I actually make a living that I can live on? And so I don't know. There's a little bit then of a disconnect between the attitudes of a 22-year-old and the attitude of a 28-year-old, and so how do you bridge that gap? How do
how do we do counseling so that gap can be bridged? And I think that's a real problem, because what's acceptable at 22 is not quite so acceptable at 28 or 30 with 3 kids
and a mortgage. So first of all, the national data on this is somewhat different than students don't care, and I'll show you a number in a couple of minutes. But the HERE, the Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA, actually asks students all the time on an annual basis, freshmen, why are you here? What do you want from college? And especially the last 5 years, by far the number one reason is to get a good wage. So they are, especially in the last 5 years, this is really high on people's minds. And I'll show you some data in a minute that confirms this. Okay, let me just, there's one, let me go through the next 2 slides quickly, because I think it's the ones after this that turn out to be important for your purposes. So Aram and Rosika had a blockbuster book about 5 years ago called Academically Adrift, and they went back and followed these students 5 years later to find out which of these students have launched and have launched lives. And they use the Collegiate Learning Assessment, which you're all in Texas, you're all familiar with, which is a reflection of critical thinking, analytic reasoning, problem solving, and written communication skills. And these, they argue, the CLA argues as together the kinds of skills that are really valued. And I want to come back to that in a minute, because one of the problems that we have is what's critical thinking. That term itself is loaded with so many different definitions, and it actually turns out to be, I hate to say it, much more simple than we think, but actually they're like religious debates about not surprisingly, what critical thinking is. And basically what they find is that students with these critical thinking skills, as measured by CLA, were much more likely to be employed and have launched lives. And this is important. And the number of students who got it is critically low, by the way, and this is an indictment. Ultimately, both Academically Adrift and Aspiring Adults Adrift are indictments of our education system for not inspiring or instilling these skills in our students. And part of and here's the bottom line. One of the worst takeaways of that book is that students who did not have these skills and who were having trouble launching their careers still said that they had a great education. Now, that may be because they had different values or judged a great education in a different way, right? But the fact of the matter is that they did not have these critical skills, they were not prospering in the job market, and they still thought they had a great education. So, this is something I think that one of the themes that we talked about, here was, what do students want? What do they think they're going to do? So they may have gotten a great education, but it's not reflected in this core set of skills or in the job market. So part of the problem is that the role of is and this is going to be a fundamental issue that we all face. Look, I was a faculty member. My whole career was as a distinguished, not my whole career, but I ended as a distinguished professor. I was fairly well known as a political scientist. I was the vice president of the American Political Science Association. I had stripes and bling and medals and all the kind of stuff that goes along with this. I couldn't even walk in graduation because I loaded down with all this academic bling. So students, the most valuable thing that they want is a good career, a good job, and 70% said, this is a survey, and actually there's a link, I think, to this talk that Dan Rosenzweig gave at the ASU GSV Advisors Innovation Summit. You could Google it. It's really an interesting talk. 70% of students in a national survey they commissioned wanted to gain skills that employers will pay for. Okay, the faculty, they wanted 80% strong critical thinking, 65% exposure to new ideas. Okay, so again, this is where this critical thinking idea comes into play, because what employers may think of as critical thinking and critical skills are not necessarily what employers want, right? And this, so there's a fundamental culture clash that we need to understand and we need to resolve. So here, by the way, is also from the Chegg study. So what are the critical? This is from a survey of employers, a national survey of employers. So what are the critical skills, right? Again, the critical skills, the critical thinking skills, the critical, right? I mean, so we have to be prepared to get involved in what this critical means, right? Critical skills, critical thinking skills, right? So what are the skills that employers say are really needed? Okay, word processing. 89%. Spreadsheet, data analytics, database queries, personal information management, presentation design. Sounds like Office. Microsoft Office. So if you could do that, if you have the certifications of that or knowledge of that, right? If you could find an element in a database, if you could put words together, right? If you could put data together, if you could present it, these are critical skills. So one of the really interesting things to me are these other surveys where people interview CEOs, and what are you looking for a CEO? Deep analytic skills, right? Because all these guys came out of Harvard and Yale and places like that, rounded education, right? But the CEOs never talk to their hiring managers because the hiring managers are people with degrees and technical degrees and paying premiums for people that know how to do things. So these are the kinds of critical skills that employers say that they need. Well, so again, a personal story. Both my daughters went to good liberal arts schools, and they both majored in crazy esoteric stuff. And I said, look, I'm paying for your education. So the one thing I'm going to insist is that I don't care what you major in, but you have to take statistics, you have to take courses with writing, you have to take mathematics, right? And 10%, 15% of your coursework has to be in those areas, and I don't care what else you do, right? You can major in God knows what, but you have to have these skills. And they both did it, and they both are doing fine. So these skills, these are critical skills. But again, we have to be prepared to engage in a fight over what critical skills are. And then we have to be engaged in this discussion. The faculty have the right skills. So again, I was an academic my whole life. I had a department. I've hired and fired many people. But what we hired and fired on were conceptual knowledge, deep theoretical thoughts, et cetera, right? We were not hiring faculty that were, in fact, we looked down on faculty that were, that had concrete skills, that were training people for jobs. Oh, that's career training. We don't do that. We do deep thinking, right? So in 2006, a study showed that 60% of college professors in STEM fields had no experience in industry. So I taught public policy for 30 years. Again, awards and all this kind of stuff. So when I went to work for the government, at the end of 4 years in government, I resigned from Stony Brook. I retired from Stony Brook. And my faculty, they said, why do you do this? I said, because you're the enemy and I don't want to come back and work with you. And they said, what are you talking about? And I said, because I'm moving on. And they said, could you come back and give a talk about what it was like in government? Because you're like the highest ranking government official we've ever had. I said, sure. So I came back, and my opening line, was, look, for 25 years I taught public policy. And in 4 years I worked at very high levels of government. Every one of my students should sue me for malpractice. There's nothing I taught them that had anything to do with the world in which I lived for the last 4 years. Because I was doing deep theory, I was doing, high-level analytics, and, I made my students right. At least I got that part right. But the kind of skills, the kind of communications, the kind of ability to deliver, information to the Secretary of Education or to congressional staff, these are skills that we never taught to any of my students, right? I had a person teaching budget, and he said any fool could write a budget, right? I said, no, any fool could say that and fire him. Anyway, so this is totally, again, faculty are passing on their conceptual and theoretical approaches without any hands-on experience of actually managing, selling, or building things. So we have to engage in that. But again, part of the problem is that universities are independent fiefdoms, right? The departments run so much, they're so powerful. And when I was a faculty member, I loved it. It was great. It was perfect. It was the best world ever. right? I was getting paid a lot of money to do whatever I wanted to do. I mean, it was great. But I mean, I think most faculty understand that that has to change. But we need people with more practical skills. And finally, this is the bottom line. It's not rocket science. So no matter what major a student chooses, there are skills that are valued in the labor market that every single graduate should have in their toolbox. And these could be, this should be the whole set of things that I showed you earlier: writing, word processing, database management. Find something in a database. Know how to manage information. Management information, PIMS. Know certain skills. And I don't care if you learn them in an English class, or you learn them in a French class, or you learn them in political science, or you learn them in engineering. You have to have a set of skills, and these include fundamental presentation skills and database skills. You have to be able to take disparate pieces of information. You have to be able to assemble them into a single document, and you have to be able to present it, right? This is what CLA is actually, for all the dress up that goes around it. This is what CLA really does. Here's some information, find the key concepts, find the key story, put it together in a presentation. I mean, that's a critical skill, but I mean, that we have to talk about that we have to say, this is what we want students to have, this is fundamental to a college education. It's a little crazy, right? But this is the discussion that we have to have. And I'm pretty sure you know who the first picture is. Students probably need to spend more time with Bill and less time. Okay, who knows who that guy is? Mr. Proust, Marcel Proust. So anyway, one of my favorite examples, because parsing Proust. So you need to know Microsoft Office and not how to parse Proust. Anyway, that's so. With that, let me. We have just on time. So questions, please.
Well, we did have some questions, so but let's take some more time, which we've done traditionally with our speakers, to make sure we get the most value added out of their valuable time. So.
I think, Mark, what you said is just mind-blowing. It's something that should be said but is never said, and something that, while we say we need more people with practical experience teaching, more professors with practical experience, is there a way to actually make that happen? If we come to, first of all, to come to the realization that is really needed, that everybody's in faculties all over, universities all over the world agreed with you and their faculty. And they say, Mark is absolutely right, we have to make a major change. First is one, could that happen? And number two, if it could, how long would it take to actually have much higher percentage of our teaching professors have practical skills?
So again, from my own experience, so I was, I had a great career in political science. And do you know how many friends I have left in political science? None. Right. So I'm heretical, right, on this. And I must admit that I really believe this. I mean, I really and truly believe this. I did it to my kids. I sent them to liberal arts schools, but I made them get practical skills. Of which writing was the most important. I would not send them to school where there was not a lot of writing. But I will tell you, I don't know, as maybe people that have lapsed religions, feel like I have a lot of friends for one reason or other that are Jack Mormons, right? And and you can see sometimes they get really conflicted when you start talking about their faith and this. So I was raised in a faith. Right, in academia, it was a faith, and this is apostasy, and I am, I must admit that I'm conflicted about this. And when I talk about this, I believe this, but your question's like, oh my God, do I really, am I really going to be? How's this going to happen? And if I was the chair of my department again, would I actually do this? And I don't know, because the pressures are all in one direction. The reward system, the money, the recognition, the bling, all this stuff is for doing, So one of the reasons that I quit academia was because I was an expert on charter schools. Right before I got interested in higher education, I was working on charter schools. And I realized that I was writing to 5 people. One of the hottest issues in the country. And all I cared about was whether or not 5 people, all of them, I could name each one of them in different universities, Were they reading my work? 5 people. And I said, I can't do that anymore. But, so there's a religion. I mean, and so again, I give Texas all the credit in the world for, being willing to face up to this and to face this. But it's going to be really hard because the whole religion is structured in a certain way. And, so I hired plenty of, professors of practice and people with practical experience, never as full-time faculty, always as adjuncts, always exploiting them. Right, and if I wanted to hire someone with the one person that we did hire with who was a retired planner, and it was a very valuable faculty member, he was ostracized in the department because he talked about the trains, right, rather than like how's Long Island going to live with with a broken train system. Mm-hmm. So how long will it take? A very long time. And how could it happen? I think. Again, I think that it's people like you that have to start having a serious discussion about how we can up the investment in critical skills. And again, I think we have to be really careful about making sure that critical skills are not the ability to parse Proust, but the ability to manipulate data, present data, integrate data. And I'm going to echo something that David said, and that is, many students come out with communication skills. We hope they come out with communication skills that should be valuable in the market, and they have to be perfected, and they have to be told that these are valuable skills.
Yes, Bob.
Well, I guess my comment is that I don't think it's as grim as you paint, particularly as far as the faculty is concerned. That I've been an engineering faculty member and have been a dean and all the other trappings of administration, but I think we do indeed value experience in the particular field. And I see it in economics. I see it in areas now. When you get into some of the liberal arts, it's fuzzy. There's no doubt about it. But in my experience, and it's not all in engineering because I was a college president as well, that I see there is a value that faculty put on their colleagues in being able to communicate the ultimate use of that particular educational element. And I just wanted to clarify that because I don't think it's just, everybody just goes off their own ways and does whatever they think they want to do.
Yes, and what would you, when you talk about universities, what would you say about the research discoveries that have come out, some of which may be theoretical but end up being very practical, but would have never got to the practical had there not been professors of biochemistry, professors of other things that were looking at those elements? No, and they're part of the academic circle too. Yes, they're part of what makes. They're part of what students experience that they wouldn't experience if what I knew how to do is to tell them how to do a PowerPoint.
Okay, so let's. So there are many tiers, as you well know, right? The American higher education system is multifaceted and segmented and stratified and all, in all kinds of ways, right? There are thousands of Title IV institutions, and many of them have different missions. Right, and different, and so the first thing is I believe that we have made terrible judgments with regard to research universities in terms of underinvestments. So I endorse your position 100% that coming out of our major research universities, there are important. These are gems. We still own the majority of schools in the Times of London higher education rankings. And we, excuse me, and these are important institutions, and we have to figure out how to recognize, reward, and sustain those. I don't think there's a question about that. But 70% of American students in public institutions go to schools like UT Brownsville, the Cal States, not the UC systems, right? And those, and a lot of those are no-name, regional. And those are different kinds of institutions. Then we have the community colleges, which a 48%, 50% of post-secondary students go to community colleges. So we have to be, we have to be careful about saying this is, that what's good for Berkeley is good for Cal State Chico, right? Or what's good for UT Austin is the same expectations we bring to Brownsville or San Antonio. So we have to have a much more nuanced view of that, and I think we need to protect our research institutions exactly for the reason that you're talking about. But most students don't go to those institutions.
What do you do about the kid that's at UT Brownsville that has the potential to be the next fill in the X discoverer of such and such? Do you just say, sorry you went to UT Brownsville, you don't get a chance to get into that milieu? How do you take care of that? If you don't have them get basic skills in these sciences that allows them to maybe go to graduate school at UT Austin. And I'm trying to figure out how we bridge that gap with, if what I've taught them is how to do a PowerPoint.
No, I'm sorry. So that's not... No, so I want to be careful because that's not what I said. What I said, and I go back and show you, right, that, no matter what major a student chooses, there are skills that are valued in the labor market, no matter what major a student chooses.
I understand, I agree with that.
Right.
But what I'm talking about was when you start stratifying schools so that this is what you should get at UT Brownsville and this is what you should get at UT Austin, I don't have a problem with that if everybody had the skills and the resources and the counseling to go to any one of those institutions. But the kids that go to UT Brownsville, it isn't that they wouldn't like to go to UT Austin. In many cases, it's that they can't afford to go to UT Austin. And they may be every bit as bright, they may be every bit as capable, and I have some problem with just kind of counting them out before we start. Now, that's probably the most efficient. And if we want a higher education system that is efficient first and foremost, then that's one thing. If we want a higher education system that is a system of potential opportunities, particularly in a state like this, where we have these very dramatic socioeconomic differences. And I've been to every university in this state several times, and there's some super bright kids at UT Brownsville, but they won't get the same chances, and they certainly won't be if they were at UT Austin, and they certainly won't get them if they don't get a good, solid science background in whatever it is, and we train them only or primarily with the idea that they're going to get a secondary kind of job in a specific industry.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's what Mark intended. Maybe he did, but I think I'm sitting here thinking one of the issues is that we're not talking directly about is how are students taught, and wherever you are, because most of us who were faculty members were not taught how to teach other than how we were taught ourselves. And fortunately for me, I had my dissertation chair was someone who didn't communicate well. He knew he didn't communicate well, and he learned how to, and he taught us if we were going to go into the field, we needed to, the stat that we had learned was useless if we couldn't explain it to anyone. And I think a lot of these things that can happen, you can actually make that class at Brownsville or UT Tyler or Tarleton State more effective if it's a more active learning, if the student is really engaging with that knowledge in a way that they have to be able to explain it to other people. I think they're going to be more competitive in graduate schools if they can do that, and somehow we need to get better at that. And I think, agreeing with Bob, I think there are a lot of faculty that are much better at that now than when I was teaching originally. And I know you're very good at that, actually. And so I think part of it comes down to how do you employ the tools, and the students are different. My youngest daughter actually used to use PowerPoints to try to get things from my wife and me. So just spouted with a pointer and do PowerPoint, which he was in the 4th grade. And so,
Did it work?
and these skills, no, usually not. but I think they're sort of secondary skills, and some of the faculty are less good at using them now, but I think the younger faculty are getting better and better, and some of the other faculty are picking it up. There's also one of our staff always talks about HIP, which is not what it sounds like, but high impact practices, the use of service learning, the use of internships, paid internships, a number of things to supplement that so they get some real understanding of how to, if they're learning demographics, how really it's very useful and how you can explain it to people and how you can apply it to different things. And so in my mind, this is, and I may be wrong, this is sort of what we're really talking about. Not that we don't need some of these things any longer, but how you can get the most out of them, how you can, if you go into a field and you choose not to go to graduate school, how can you make sure you know that you have some of these skills that you can sell yourself with when you go into the marketplace. And I think most people in this room, or I bet half, probably are doing something different than they originally planned on doing. And even in engineering, Bob, I know a lot of people are not engineers after their first 5 years, but they couldn't have gotten where they are without their engineering degree. So even those jobs that are more directly connected to the marketplace, careers look a little different. And, as we heard from Georgetown earlier, in the U.S. we have an environment in which we're not so linear, but we're more of a flexible environment. And one of our advantages is being able to use these broader skills and bring them to different tasks at hand and be able to adapt and go on. But you have to get your foot in the door to begin with, whether it's graduate school, professional school, or GSD&M.
So could I just add, so just one error that I find many of us make. So I have a PhD, you have a PhD. If I went around and asked everybody here what their degrees are, probably like very heavy laden with 3 letters or more at the end, right? And so we tend to think, my whole life I'm surrounded with PhDs, right? This is the world I live in. And several times people talked about graduate school and getting, David just said, whether or not they're going to graduate school or professional school. So if you look at the numbers, the bachelor's degree is the terminal degree for most Americans, followed by the associate degree. Right. So and when you finish with your bachelor's degree or you finish with your associate degree, that for many people, that's the end of their formal education. They're going into the marketplace with those degrees. So something like 80,000 biology bachelor's degrees were granted last year, 2 years ago rather, and 3,000 masters in biology and like 1,200 PhDs in biology. Just to keep in perspective that what we're talking about are students that are going into the marketplace with a bachelor's or as associates as their terminal degree. And if we think of trying to gear our system of education to the students who are going on to graduate school, that's a minority of students. And again, we have to honor them, we have to respect them, we have to protect our research institutions. We have all of that is true. But the vast bulk of Americans are ending up with either an associate degree or a bachelor's degree as their terminal degree, and they're going into the marketplace with those skills. They have to have the fundamental skills to get in the door, to be employed, not to be underemployed, and to launch careers, which may change, 5 years out, 10 years out, they're going to be, they will change, but you have to start, and you're going to start with a bachelor's degree or you're going to start with an associate degree, and the skills that they need, I think we could identify and we could try to encourage them.
Well, Dr. Snyder, this has been very thought-provoking. We're running past our time. Dr. Faulkner, do you have a...
No, I'll pass.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for the presentation. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Excellent.
And with that, I'd like to continue our discussions by introducing Dr. Randy Dial, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin. He served for nearly 40 years as a psychology professor at UT Austin, studying how humans perceive speech and teaching hundreds of undergraduate and graduate students. Since 2007, he has also demonstrated his passion for teaching and research as Dean of College of Liberal Arts. Under his leadership, an increasing number of college programs and departments gained national prominence. Scholarly research is focused on language, cognition, perception. For the past 3 decades, won multiple research grants, as well as several prestigious university teaching awards. He has published more than 70 papers and articles. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Do I need to move this? Can you hear me? I have a loud voice, so I probably don't need it to be too close. Okay, that's wonderful. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I agree with much of what Mark Schneider said earlier, except with respect to parsing Proust. I may get to that. But to stay within my time limit, I've written down my comments in a packet that is going around. There's a version and one or two other handouts that you can refer to if you wish. So I'm going to begin with some good news about liberal arts graduates in the working world and direct your attention to this handout in your packet. A 2013 report from the Association of American Colleges and Universities shows humanities and social science majors in their peak earning years out-earn peers from professional and pre-professional majors. An employer survey conducted that same year by that association indicates that 74% recommend a 21st century liberal education in order to create a more dynamic worker. 95% of employers give hiring preference to college graduates with skills that will enable them to contribute to innovation in the workplace. 93% indicate that it demonstrated a capacity to think critically. That very confusing concept. To communicate clearly and to solve complex problems is more important than the candidate's undergraduate major. 75% of employers want more emphasis on 5 key areas that are central to a liberal arts education. They are critical thinking, complex problem solving, written communication, oral communication, and applied knowledge in real-world settings. Also on the right-hand side of the handout are the results of a 2014 survey by the National Association of Colleges and Employers, which emphasized the very skills that we impart at UT Austin through our rigorous curriculum. The handout also cites recent findings from the Center for Digital Humanities at University College London, which show that nearly 60% of U.S.-born CEOs and heads of product engineering have humanities degrees. Indeed, the tech world hires thousands of our students. Last year, Google executive Marissa Mayer said her company expected to hire 6,000 new employees, with 4,000 to 5,000 of those hires coming from liberal arts. I needn't look beyond my own office to find proof. One of our student employees, Molly Wahlberg, a Latin American Studies major, was hired by Google last fall. The recruiting executive told her that they hired her specifically because of her humanities education and her internship and travel abroad experiences, all elements of the liberal arts experience provided by UT Austin. In a complex and global marketplace, corporate leaders want dynamic and innovative workers who possess the strengths inherent in a liberal arts education. The most successful employees of this generation and the next will be creative, curious, natural systems thinkers, problem solvers, cross-culturally competent and proficient in writing and articulating ideas clearly. So we know that employers seek the diverse attributes found in a liberal arts education: communication skills, leadership, analytical and quantitative skills, a strong work ethic, teamwork, and problem-solving skills. But according to the Association of American Colleges and Universities, when employers evaluate candidates for future success, they also place special emphasis on those who demonstrate ethical judgment and integrity, intercultural skills, and the capacity for continued learning. And when employers consider academic programs that best prepare students for successful transitions to the workplace, they endorse programs that require students to conduct research and use evidence-based analysis, gain in-depth knowledge, develop analytic, problem-solving, and communication skills, and apply their learning in real-world settings. In sum, employers seek scrupulous candidates with a broad range of knowledge and skills rather than field-specific training and experience. This is what we offer in the College of Liberal Arts at UT. Now I'd like to briefly examine how the humanities, social sciences, and languages taught at UT provide a strong foundation from which students can understand and thrive in a world of complex business ecosystems. Critical thinking. Students learn to use evidence-based analysis to formulate innovative solutions to business and social issues. Systems thinking. Students learn to evaluate situations from various interdisciplinary perspectives, fostering a big picture approach. Understanding people. Students learn to observe and understand individuals and groups to better appreciate how they process information, how they make decisions, what motivates them, and how cultural and societal norms affect the way they perceive the world. Innovation. Students are challenged to find new options, to develop new concepts, and to create and appreciate artistic works in order to hone their creative talents and outside-the-box thinking. Communication. Students learn to write, present, persuade, speak, and debate to become proficient and successful communicators. Cross-cultural competence. Students learn to be proficient in a second or even a third language, providing increased mobility in the international job market and an appreciation of foreign languages and cultures. I can't emphasize enough the importance of language training as an entry point into understanding other cultures. Ethics. Students learn theories and concepts of ethics and moral propositions to address conflicts and to determine individual direction. Technology. Students learn to use information technology strategically and to appreciate how technology is used by consumers. In order to compete in the job market, liberal arts students must complement their academic studies with a range of professional development and experiential learning solutions. To that end, our liberal arts career services emphasizes the need for students to apply their liberal arts studies outside the classroom. We do this in a number of ways. Internships. Internships are the new entry-level position. Students learn in an intensive training period, and employers use the internship as a long-term interview and hiring pipeline. Professional skill development. For those students who are new to the professional world, we provide a series of training programs to introduce key tools and concepts, including introductions to specific fields such as social media management, project management, and technical writing, as well as introductions to technology and software applications. Career courses. Students can enroll in credit-granting courses designed to help develop a professional online brand, targeted application materials, and strategic career search plans. Career coaching. Students can visit with a career coach to discuss their interests, develop a strategic four-year plan, and to craft targeted application materials, all to better prepare for successful post-graduation career launch. Complementary skills and knowledge. Students interested in business careers meet with career coaches to discuss ways to complement their liberal arts degree. Many complete business foundations programs at UT, pursue dual BA and BBA degrees or an MBA, or use their interdisciplinary study program to merge their academic and research interests in the liberal arts and business. Marketing the liberal arts degree. By the end of their 4 years, students have a diverse portfolio of experiences, skills, and knowledge, and we help them put it all together. By developing their personal liberal arts story, students are prepared to demonstrate their academic and professional strengths and skills, and to effectively summarize their successes and career goals. Liberal arts success in preparing students for graduation and beyond has been recognized by the University of Texas. I was asked by Bill Powers 3 years ago to head the task force on improving the 4-year graduation rate. As a result of the implementation, not complete but ongoing, of our recommendations, the University of Texas at Austin last year had its highest first-year retention rate on record, at the same time that we had the highest enrollment on record. Those two things are usually inversely correlated. So that suggests that the implementation of the recommendations of the task force are having a positive effect on graduation rates. Liberal arts was also asked to spearhead the new Texas recruitment and interview service. This was something that was tried out in another college, which I will not name. Did not lead to a positive outcome. Bill Powers asked liberal arts if we would do it on behalf of the whole university, and in October, 1 month from now, we will be opening the doors of TRIS, the Texas Recruitment and Interview Service. It'll serve all of the students, including the Macomb School, but really for the first time it'll be serving liberal arts, natural sciences, communication, other students as well. And we're very, very excited about that. So I want to talk about some challenges. In the College of Liberal Arts, we face a number of challenges and opportunities in preparing students for life beyond campus. Engaging students early and often. Liberal arts students are not typically career-oriented as students in professional programs. To that end, our programs are highly proactive in reaching out to students and promoting career preparedness. Let me talk about Liberal Arts 101, which is Liberal Arts Planning and Pathways. This is a course now, a one credit hour course that all liberal arts students are recommended to take, not yet required. This first-year course is designed to introduce students to their new college community and to help students plan for a successful 4 years of study and eventual graduation. 2 sections of the course are dedicated to career planning, helping students understand that it is never too early to start thinking about what's next. Student outreach. Career Services is proactive in reaching out to and connecting with students online, in the office and around campus, partnering with academic advisors, student organizations, and community advocates in promoting its resources. Job search. Some students will not be ready to consider the job search until the senior year or near graduation. With that in mind, Career Services delivers job search intensive boot camps that provide an introduction to resumes, interviewing, job search, and networking in a 2.5-hour session. Another challenge is helping students connect the dots, whether researching the works of Shakespeare or Proust, or tracing the endangered languages of Texas. Students are learning key skills that help make them ideal 21st century professionals. How we help? Faculty support. Liberal arts faculty lead classroom discussions on how students can apply their knowledge in real-world settings. Case studies and projects. Liberal arts programs are incorporating more business case studies and individual and group projects to the curriculum. An example is Liberal Arts 325, the Liberal Arts Entrepreneur. This is a 3-credit upper division course that helps liberal arts students use creativity, innovative ideas, and skills to create an entrepreneurial business. Career preparation. What are you going to do with your major is a question that most liberal arts students will hear at some point, including from their parents. Many believe that without specialized and career-directed training, liberal arts students are less competitive in the job market. As I have demonstrated, that is not the case. I would like to just comment on one of the slides that showed, for example, sociology majors not doing very well relative to engineers, but law students were doing very well. And most law students have liberal arts undergraduate degrees. I do want to make the point that much of the postgraduate training is based on a foundation of liberal arts education. Liberal arts and emerging technologies. A large portion of the current job market didn't exist 10 years ago when the social media landscape was new. Facebook was founded in 2004. Cloud computing was gaining steam in the consumer market. Bluetooth was all the rage. Apple was all about the iPod. and video blogs were on the horizon. Today, these technologies are a societal mainstay and have created booming job trends. Considering the expansiveness of these emerging fields, one has to wonder, what will the job market look like in 2024? No one knows. In order to keep pace with the changing business environment, employers will continue to recruit students who demonstrate creativity and flexibility in fluid situations. No one can do that better than a liberal arts student. One of the world's most successful and insightful entrepreneurs, the late Steve Jobs, believed that this was true, and I'll close with his words. It's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the result that makes our hearts sing. Thanks.
Okay, I'd like to open it up for questions. Yes, Jerry?
Is it possible to house a successful liberal arts college in a non-residential university?
If you could use your mic.
Let me repeat the question. Is it possible to have a successful liberal arts college housed in a non-residential university? I would say yes. I think that we're in the process right now in the College of Liberal Arts and other colleges on campus of developing really high quality courses for online distribution. And the next step is developing entire degree programs. So, one version of this is, non-residential education for students doing the work online. The key for us, and this is absolutely essential, the quality has to fit the UT quality standard. It carries the UT brand, and therefore it has to be of that quality. But I believe that these courses can be very, very successful. We already have data suggesting that in terms of the quality of the learning, the mastery of the concepts, the online version can do just as well as the in-class version. I happen to think, however, that the residential experience is extremely important for a lot of reasons. Among others, it's that direct one-on-one contact with a faculty member that I think really enriches the undergraduate experience. If you talk to our brightest students, they will all say that. The most important part of my undergraduate experience was working in the laboratory with a faculty member or his team or her team, working with a faculty member who mentored my writing, or working with a faculty member on developing language skills, foreign language skills, for example. So the residential university is not going to go away in the era of online learning, but I think we need to be developing really high-quality courses that are then available to students who either can't afford or simply don't have the time to apply to a residential university.
Yes, Raymond.
Randy, I really admire some of the work that you're doing. For example, the Liberal Arts Planning and Pathways course, and I really am interested in this liberal arts entrepreneur class. But my experience on university campuses is that this kind of activity is typically spotty, it's haphazard, it's random. You and I both know that there are a lot of faculty, not only in the liberal arts, but in the social sciences as well, who will tell you very frankly, it's not my job to prepare somebody for the workforce. My job is to teach a student how to read a text, literary text. And so I wonder, I have two questions. So what percentage of students in the liberal arts at UT are touched by these kinds of experience? And secondly, assuming that your answer will be not enough, how can we do this systematically across the curriculum?
Well, the answer is not enough. And in fact, that was listed under the challenges. Trying to offer, for example, career services to our students early and often is a challenge. Every student I talk to when they arrive on campus, whether individually or in groups, I will say, you have the experience to get involved in student organizations. We have 1,400 official organizations. Get involved. We find that is not only good in its own right, but it actually is correlated with higher academic performance. Your academics is your first priority, but don't fail to get involved with the professionals in liberal arts career services. They know their business. You should go there within the first couple of weeks and establish a working relationship, because you really should be, in addition to getting a great liberal arts education, you should be oriented toward what follows 4 years later. It may be professional school, it may be a job. But we have had difficulty getting students excited about coming over and visiting our career services. So what are we doing to try to improve that? We are going to make Liberal Arts 101, which is in part run by career services. Right now it's optional, it's encouraged, but we're moving toward a model where that'll be mandatory. And then two, one of the actually a number of the recommendations in the task force improving the 4-year graduation rate had to do with improving the advising, the academic advising. And we're doing that. We've been doing it in liberal arts for some time. The whole campus is, I think, now doing that. But an important part of advising is going to be directing students to career services. The advisors generally that's not their professional turf, but people in career services, again, they know their business. But it has been a challenge, frankly. And I think what we really have to do is put a little bit more, make some things mandatory, and just provide stronger encouragement. And maybe get their parents involved.
Yeah, and in some ways you could argue that the ethos of the liberal arts is anti-job preparation. And I'm reminded of the famous anecdote, I guess it was at Oxford, when Oxford and Cambridge started developing professional schools, and one of the old dons said that the campus was being taken over by tradesmen.
Well,
still some of that.
I think there is some of that, frankly. Academics are, I know there are a number of lapsed academics or actual academics are kind of strange in this way. I know mathematicians, pure mathematicians, who get very upset if their mathematical work ever finds a practical use. I know people in the government department, you'll recognize this, Mark, who say, I'm not interested in applied issues in political science. I'm not interested in how we improve governance. Or the political system. I'm interested in something called sort of basic research. I think this is nonsense. My work is basic research on the ear and the brain, how we decode the first layers of spoken language. But I'm delighted when my work has an application in developing strategies for speech perception in the hearing impaired, for example, or kids with language disabilities. Most of my colleagues, I have to say, in the psychology department, love practical application as a kind of test bed for their theory and their basic research. But this is an attitude. I do think it's waning. Certainly it's waning in the College of Liberal Arts. A couple of points in that I think support that. Our economics department, a year and a half ago, more or less at my suggestion, developed a residential, what's called an Option 3 master's program. This is separate from their regular PhD track. It's not constrained by the same tuition rules. It is meant in part to be a revenue source for economics, and it is. But it really is meant to augment, in addition to generating revenue, it's meant to augment the kind of theoretical basic research program of the economics department and provide something of real practical use for students, whether they're UT students or not. We, even before that, launched another Option 3 master's program that we've just now accepted. The second class has just joined us. It's called The Human Dimensions of Organizations, and it's really targeted at people in the world of business, nonprofits, and the military to provide clear linkage between what research in the humanities and social sciences can tell us about running organizations and motivating people. So, and by the way, faculty are just lining up to teach in these courses. So whereas there may have been some of this aloofness from the world of the practical world of careers and so on, I think it's beginning to disappear. I hope it is.
Dr. Faulkner?
I'd like to follow that up, actually, and I'd like to say some things that may synthesize sort of between these two presentations we've had, which I'd like to express thanks for. I think Mark made a pretty strong critique of faculty culture. You called it a religion. I'm very familiar with it too. But it's, I think it has done a lot of things very well. And I think, Mark, as you have elaborated a list of things that are important skills for students to command in order to augment their, or to enhance their ability to be employed. It's also important for them to know something when they come out of school. I'm a chemist. It's not enough for them just to master Office and to have critical thinking ability. They actually have to know some chemistry if they're going to be employed. And that's true in many specialized areas, of course, of the undergraduate world, but it's also true that everybody has to have an intellectual framework, and that has to be constructed in the course of an undergraduate education somehow. The faculty, I think, are actually good at that for the most part. I think the real weakness of faculty culture is that all of the people we hire as faculty members were great students. And were students who wanted to push themselves to the highest level of scholastic achievement. So they think naturally, almost unconsciously, about the goal of education being what they did. Whereas the fact is that most students don't do what they did. Mm-hmm. And they're insufficiently attuned to preparing those students for students who aren't going on to PhD programs or other postgraduate kinds of experiences. And that's the vast majority of the students. What I think is happening is that there is, however, tremendous market pressure developing. And what you heard from Randy is a very elaborate market response that has been developed in the College of Liberal Arts at UT, and there are other things like that. I am pretty confident that we can use market devices to make improvements, but I think it's also very important for this committee to reinforce that message in Texas public policy. But I don't think we have to throw out the entire culture. I think we do need to put mechanisms in that put a drive toward doing a better job, a more professional job, a more complete job, a more assured job, that students are going to come out with the specific kinds of market-oriented skills that they really need. I see those as an add-on, a component to undergraduate education that does need work.
Yes, I think it is a combination of both of these presentations, because I don't think it's either or. You know, it is the thing that, yeah, you need to have your skills, but you also need to be thinking. It's been my experience that a lot of students have been told by their parents and others, get your degree, get your degree, get your degree. And they view that as their ultimate goal. And you can talk to classes of students that are seniors and say, okay, what's your life's goal? Well, right now, my only goal is to get my degree. What are you going to do the day after you have your degree? Here you are, you've got your degree in your hand. It is now day 2. What do you do? And out of 30 students, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 will know. The other 25 just get this blank look in their face. I do think that it is extremely important to have in the career services to make this 2.5-hour boot camp that you have, to make it repetitive, to make it required, to make it an important thing. What are you going to do with your degree? How much money are you going to earn? You're earning a degree in order to make a living, and that is always a part of their total thinking, and that you have to have these presentation skills, these analytical skills, all of this thing that you're being taught, but one day you're going to be out there, and it's going to be so different than what you think it's going to be. Most students don't know what it's going to be and haven't really thought about it. We have to encourage them to think about their life and about their careers.
I completely agree.
Yes, Bernie.
We've got these folks on the payroll in academia called academic advisors, career counselors, in my generation, guidance counselors, all that kind of stuff. But how are they scored in terms of performance metrics? How are they scored?
Well, let me give you first a kind of generic or more global answer. I'm a numbers guy myself. I was actually a math minor as an undergraduate and as a graduate student. And my area of psychology is very quantitative. So when I became dean, I insisted that we have good quantitative information about all of our programs and how well we were doing. What are the metrics that should apply? Here's an interesting fact. When I came to the UT campus, we didn't have professional advisors. Faculty played that role, and I have to say, not well. They may have been motivated, but they didn't really know what they were doing in the domain of advising. When we brought in, and we know the time frame over which we professionalized advising, and by every measure of student success went up. The 4-year graduation rate jumped up fairly dramatically over the 4-year period that professional advising was introduced on the UT campus.
But are there compensation packages impacted by those results?
Yeah, individual advisors are definitely, their performance is monitored carefully. If they're not performing, they're eliminated. We have very high performance standards in the College of Liberal Arts. I think we have the best group of advisors on campus.
How do you score them? What do you look at when you sit down and you're doing a good job or you're not?
Sure. Well, there are a number of things. Advisors typically are assigned to a range of different kinds of students. They range from at-risk students to students who are definitely at the other end of the spectrum. Some of our advisors, frankly, do tend to specialize at the at-risk in the at-risk category, but we look at the metrics of student success. We look at whether the performance of the measures of student success changed after we introduced a new program. So let me give you an example. In 2009, we introduced a program called U-Turn. You get the UT part of this. And U-Turn was meant, and this was several years before the recommendations of the Graduation Rate Task Force were given to the president. U-Turn is about improving first-year retention. When students drop out, it's usually because of weak performance in the first year. And so we tried to address it. First of all, students who were in jeopardy, we gave them the option of joining the U-Turn program. If they agreed to do that, we gave them more intensive academic advising. We gave them a lot of experience with peer mentors. A lot of the issue had to do with lack of confidence. These were, first-generation students, many of them coming in under the top 10% rule, who were bright and motivated but not well prepared, frankly, for college work, at least at UT. And so we did a lot more with the advising. We did not dumb down the curriculum in any way. But as a result of this program, we increased our first-year retention rate by 25%. So those are the kind of metrics we're looking at. And then we look at individual advisor performance across the different student categories, at risk, not at risk, and so on. How well are they doing as a result of the advising that you're giving them? If they're not doing as well as they need to, we try to mentor them. If they still don't perform, we terminate them.
But they're not. Yeah, I'm sorry. You're probably going to.
I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
So there's a very specific question here, I think, that you're getting to, and I don't think you've answered it yet.
Right.
So for example, most performance budgeting systems that schools and states are adopting are about these factory measures: how many students retain, how many students progress, how many students complete. Right.
Right.
And we do pretty good jobs on measuring that, and you could create different kinds of incentives.
It's all about
on boards for doing that.
enhancing the revenue of the institution. Go ahead.
But then ultimately, like the state of Florida, the Texas technical colleges are including job outcome measures in the performance budgeting, right? And as you know, the Texas technical colleges, their entire system is driven by how well students do in the labor market. Do they get jobs, and how much do they make? So ultimately, the question in Texas, like other states like Florida, is dealing with whether or not these kinds of measures should be included in performance budgeting systems. Should they be included for the university? Should they be for the regional campuses, for the community colleges, or down to the level of which you're talking about? If you are doing career counseling, what are the metrics that we are holding you accountable for at that level? If you're doing career counseling, how many of your students found jobs, and at what wages?
I agree. I didn't answer the question at the level of what happens, what's the success rate after graduation. Let me break this down into two components. One of the first things I did in 2007 when I became dean was to start gathering a lot of data on the success of all of our graduate programs in the College of Liberal Arts. Mainly PhD programs is what we have. And so we looked at time to degree. We looked at the amount of money that was used to support each student. We looked at the percent that left without a degree, that left with a master's, even though they intended to get a PhD, the percentage that got a PhD. And then we looked at we started with their first appointment after getting the PhD. Now we've extended it so that we have a kind of a continuous running account of placement. So I consider PhD placement one of the single best measures of whether a program is successful. And we use it. We actually have eliminated PhD programs on the basis of very weak performance on placement. We've strengthened some programs, and we've also rewarded programs that have a great track record. So that's the PhD part of it. I have to say that's easier to deal with simply because it's easier to track PhDs because they tend to go into a relatively narrowly, especially in liberal arts, they tend to go into academia. And almost all of our PhDs go into training-related jobs. About half go into academia. But they're easy to find. But we know we have to do the same thing for undergraduates. It's a somewhat more challenging thing to do, but in the era of the internet, we should be able to do it. It makes it a lot easier if we can get our graduates to join the X's, the Texas X's. I give them a free one-year membership to help encourage them to stay members, because if they are X's, we know where they are, and we can monitor their career. But you're absolutely right, Mark. Ultimately, that's the standard we want to apply.
And I think listening to the two of you together it raises some interesting questions to me. And the most interesting is that 80% plus that do finish with their bachelor's degree and don't use it as a basis for an advanced degree that's more vocational and will lead them into whether it's law school or a PhD program. But for that 80% plus that do graduate, but your data would say that their income levels are somewhat impaired versus some of the hard sciences and some of the other programs. So, or maybe another way of asking do you think the marketplace is the right way to judge the outcomes at the bachelor's level in the liberal program?
So I believe. So actually, when I ran my department, we tracked PhDs because that was part of our religion, right? We were priests. We wanted to see would we turn out more priests, and it was very consistent with everything that we believed in all our practices. Turning that into an undergraduate tracking for the rank and file of your undergraduates, the 80% that don't do anything was a challenge. There are ways of doing it. The Texas X's or whatever is not the right way of doing it. I work with the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board, tracking graduates from every program in the state into the labor market. I showed you some of the data,
right.
So we could do this. I think I believe, and we have it for UT graduates. We have it for every graduate from every public institution in the state of Texas. I believe that we have to ultimately, yes. So I believe wages are just like. The first placement you get as a PhD student, whether or not you go into academia, is near to my heart as a priest of academia. Sure, I got that. But but wages have to be fundamentally included in any evaluation of programs. But we have to recognize some kind of benchmark against which these are done, right? So I agree with Steve's earlier point that students may choose to go into low-paying professions or go into low-paying majors, right? But that doesn't mean they should be going to programs in sociology that are even lower than the state benchmark, or that are underperforming relative to other programs, right? So we need to benchmark, we need to compare, we need to standardize. I mean, one of the, so I've been doing this for several years, and one of the things that I'm very sensitive about, maybe I didn't make it clear enough, is that we want to be really careful that we don't create, the school systems are segregated enough as they are. We don't want to just say, oh, you're not smart enough, you're not rich enough, or you're not white enough to go to UT Austin and get an engineering job. You're gonna learn these technical skills, and you're just gonna be a whatever, right? So we want to be really careful about that. We want an access and an opportunity society. There's no question about that. But ultimately, I believe as custodians of public money, right? And that's what public universities are. They're very expensive. And people invest in higher education because there's a human capital development system. It's the most expensive human capital system that we have in the nation. And this is why we invest in these things, because we expect to have a skilled, high-qualified workforce that's going to make our lives better down the road. So I believe that we have to put wages into performance budgeting systems. I believe we have to put job placement data into that, but it has to be fairly sophisticated and benchmark, just like we're benchmarking our performance budgeting for graduation rates by different classes of students. We have to actually get this kind of information into the hands of budgets.
One other thing I would add, I really am in favor of this kind of benchmarking, but I also believe in the long-term assessment as well as the short-term assessment. It's not simply the first-year salary post-graduation. You also want to look at how that salary trends over time, what peak earnings are. As I indicated in my remarks, liberal arts students do very well in terms of peak earnings. And so that's got to be part of the benchmarking. All this is hard, but it's doable, and we just need to do more of it.
So Texas has the data systems to do it. We're reporting tenure out, and there is, again, remarkable stability in the relative earnings of people, and it's not that hard. I mean, I'll tell you what's hard, and I'm spending a lot of time on this. So Texas, like many states, has really good relationships between the UI data, the unemployment insurance data, and the student unit records system. So the problem is, and this is not so much, quite frankly, not so much a problem for Texas because it's a big state with a robust economy, and many students are found in state. It's when students leave the state that we, and this may affect like a school like Austin more than most of the regional campuses, finding students out of state. And I'm spending an inordinate amount of time trying to crack open the Social Security Administration database to integrate with the student unit records of different states to get much better outcomes data. But it is not. It is nowhere near as hard as people say it is. In fact, in 1 year I put out these data for 5 states. I have 7 state partners, including Texas, and we're going to put out, and I hope to do a deal with Texas for the next round that'll have data for 10 years out for graduates.
Can I send all my graduate names to you?
We can give it to you in the next 5 minutes if you would like.
Excellent.
Okay. I want to thank both of you. It's been very helpful, very good input for our committee. We're running about 10 minutes behind schedule, so if we could shorten our break to about 5 minutes, I would appreciate it. And we will resume with coordinating board staff.
Cut it short. Don't wash it.
Good job.
Didn't want to say that. That's fine.
By individuals.
I'll be in touch.
Good job, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We're here. The committee ran away, but we're here.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and sit here.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue here so we can try to honor our 1 o'clock finish time. And to help stimulate our discussion, Deputy Commissioner David Gardner, Assistant Commissioner Susan Brown, and where's David?
He ran away. We can start with him.
All right. And Assistant Commissioner Rex Peoples will provide an overview of a possible workforce, marketable skill goal, and some examples of related measurable targets for the next higher education strategic plan for Texas. So the staff members presenting will be Susan, who is Assistant Commissioner for Planning and Accountability, and we'll let you introduce the possible goal. Susan.
Okay, we're going to... Oh, I don't have a puncher. Y'all are going to take care of that? Oh, there it is. I want to be able to punch myself. All right, thank you very much. We're going to start talking about the workforce goals and marketable skills. And this is just some of the headlines that you've probably heard recently about critical thinking and problem solving. I'm not sure we can add anything else given the discussion we just had. And so these are just some of the things that we pulled on why this is really an important thing. This is the goal that we've been talking about, and Mr. Hunt mentioned it earlier. And it's not that the liberal arts students and the other students don't have marketable skills. It is really more of a matter of making sure they understand what those skills are and how to market themselves when they're leaving. Because most, as was mentioned earlier, most of our students do leave with a bachelor's. They don't go on to get a master's, at least even if they do, usually not right away. So you have a handful that go on straight after their bachelor's degree. And so that's why this is such an important. The marketable skills will be different. You've got community colleges, the state colleges, a lot of their degrees are technical. They're very directly tied to the workforce. Universities, health-related institutions, the health-related, a lot of theirs are tied to the workforce, maybe at a different level than the technical colleges, but they're all tied to workforce. The liberal arts are maybe not as directly tied, even though, as we talked about earlier, the speakers talked about earlier, there is a correlation, there is a relationship to what they're learning in workforce. Why is it important? Yeah, students need to know how to articulate what they've learned. Communications is a really good idea. Critical thinking, those are things that are not quite as, students don't think about them when they come out. They don't think that, well, I learned how to communicate, I learned how to public speak, I learned how to do all these different things. They need to know and have that kind of spelled out for them. Employability, we want to make sure that students are employable. A lot of them, say right out they want to go get a job. That's why they're going to school, is to get that job. It's not necessarily highest on everybody's list. Some students say, I'm going to go on to graduate school, I'm going to do certain things, and plans change along the ways, and they need to get a job before going on to graduate school. There's all sorts of reasons. And the other thing is to have these skills. The keeping pace, as we've said many times, 25% of the jobs that will be out there in 2030 are not there right now. We don't know what they're going to be, so the students need to be able to adapt. And that's one of those kind of quote-unquote soft skills. You have to be able to adapt and relearn and to learn a new skill and new things as they come forward. And that's what we're hearing a lot from industry and that sort of thing.
Okay, you have in front of you some quotes from some of the experts in this particular area of looking at marketable skills. And the first one suggests that there is significant evidence that suggests that linking student expectations in their curriculum development to the workplace can certainly improve their completion and enhance career readiness skills. A lot of students often make the remark, I was a faculty member for a lot of years and taught government and political science and have a PhD in government. And so I'm one of those liberal arts people. But a lot of students would ask me, well, why do I need to learn this stuff? Why do I need to know any of these things? And one of the things I discovered early on, that if anything you could relate to their life experience and to going forward, made a real impact on them. And then the second quote there is about that coordination between education and workforce development that actually leads to greater alignment, but also with those foundational skills, and then what they're actually going to do later. A lot of students really don't realize how important it is to learn how to write, regardless of what they're going to do later, because it increases not only their ability to comprehend material later, but it also increases their communication skills and those kinds of things. And I think the last quote is also particularly telling in don't abandon education in the interest of training. And this goes back, I think, to that adaptable piece of this. There are a lot of suggestions that as we sit here today, we don't know what 25%, at least what 25% of the jobs will be in 10 years. And so part of the educational experience itself is being able to teach students the skills that they need, the knowledge that they need to adapt to that later on and give them the proper foundation for it. And a lot of what we think of as general education skills and marketable skills lead to that as well. So there is this collaboration already exists between employers and institutions to try to ensure alignment of both these kinds of general competencies, but also the labor market needs that they have. And you have there the list that has already been discussed more than once this morning about the kind of things that employers are constantly looking for, what they want in employees, what they're looking for in graduates as they exit college. And some of these are more hard skills than others, but the ability to innovate, integrity and intercultural skills, which are just as important as being able to clearly communicate and to critically think. There's also been increasing focus on this, and this was also discussed earlier by our two speakers about the focus on skills attainment and application. The Career One Stop that's sponsored by the U.S. Department of Labor addresses many of these issues as well and talks about what kind of skills do you need for a particular job. The American Association of Colleges and Universities, with its Liberal Education and America's Promise, what's oftentimes referred to as the LEAP initiative, is also designed to draw tighter connections between those kinds of general education and marketable skills that particularly students in liberal arts exit with, and how those are identified and assessed. Digital literacy is also becoming much more important, and that goes to some of the specific skills mentioned this morning about how do you do Microsoft Office, and how do you navigate a database, and how do you navigate a spreadsheet, and how do you, but more importantly, how do you look at information, determine its source, the validity and the reliability of those sources, and then how do you integrate that information and process it, distill it, and make sense out of it for others. The Learning Outcomes Assessment projects that have been sponsored by Lumina also not only looks at specific subject matter outcomes for particular courses and programs, but also looks at more general or marketable outcomes as well. The Council for Adult and Experiential Learning has looked at these kind of issues for a number of years, and they almost do it to some extent in reverse, if you will, as they look at the kind of experience that you've had and how do you then translate that into college credit. But at the same time, there's a lot of lessons to be learned about how do you then take college credit and translate that into those kinds of marketable skills. Lastly, work colleges have been around for some time, and there are a number of them out there that really make an effort to completely integrate both education with work. And it's not as though this kind of work is not already underway and being taken up in a variety of different directions. The Southern Association of Accrediting Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges requires every institution to identify general education competencies and the degree to which students attain those competencies. And that has become more and more focused on in general, along with their focus on institutional effectiveness. But one of the things they do look at is this notion of, regardless of your major, what kind of skills and knowledge are you exiting with that everyone is expected to know and to learn. The Texas core curriculum follows up on that same theme of what are those kinds of basic skills and knowledge that every student ought to know, regardless of what their major and regardless of whether it's an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And the core curriculum now focuses on 6 core objectives that deal with some of those things we've been talking about this morning as communication skills and critical thinking, but also looks at things like social responsibility and personal responsibility as well. Because one of the things that employers will tell you is that some of those, I don't know how to refer to this, so some of those real soft skills of interaction with other employees, and do you show up on time for work? And what we would think of as work ethic questions have arisen as well. And so the core curriculum, which in its new revised version went into effect in this fall of 2014, tries to address some of those issues at a very basic level. The Academic Course Guide Manual and Workforce Education Course Manuals, which are inventories of courses available at the lower division level and particularly to community colleges. The WECM has long since tried to identify student learning outcomes for courses, and the ACGM has been moving in that direction of also identifying learning outcomes for courses. The Texas State Technical College System and the Texas Workforce Commission have collaborated on looking at what are called detailed work activities, where they have tried to specify the specific kinds of skills that students need to perform particular jobs. We also have competency-based degree programs. The coordinating board has sponsored or is sponsoring a couple of these across the state, and there are other colleges that are dealing with competency-based programs, and the competency-based programs don't exclusively look at the kind of specific subject matter content knowledge that one needs to know to be a chemist, for example, but also looks at the marketable skills and the general competencies that students would need to know regardless of what they're going to major in. And then lastly, the tuning project, which was also supported by the Lumina Foundation, also looked at both subject matter specific learning outcomes, but also more general learning outcomes attached to particular courses and programs. Now, in spite of this, though, we still have a lot to work to do with this, and as it says, in this particular quote, that presidents are thinking about the schools or students' need for the job market, but many feel their institutions fall short in that area. So, part of the idea behind a marketable skills goal for the next higher education strategic plan is to really get institutions to identify the marketable skills that exist in any given program area. And I think that one of the things that we've done, and I agree with Dr. Faulkner, who made the point that most programs really do a good job. Not all, but certainly most programs really do a good job of identifying the specific kind of subject matter content that students need to know out of that major, that degree program. I think with initiatives like the core curriculum, then we're also beginning to do a much better job of identifying very general competencies at a basic level that all students need to know regardless of major. But in between, there are skills, knowledge that students come away with in particular degree programs that they may not be aware of, but nevertheless they are getting them. A lot of these things are already embedded in that curriculum. What we don't do is make a conscious effort to identify them, to bring them to the surface, and to also make sure that students are aware that they walked away with those kinds of skill sets that they can walk away with. I've been a political science major to a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate degree, but I also took a lot of statistics along the way and did a little bit of sort of research methodology work. And one of the things that I discovered later is that there are probably things that I could have done with statistics that I was unaware of at the time, and nobody told me that when I exited, look, you've actually not only can do some political science work, but there's also things that you can do with these skill sets that you've mastered in statistics as well. And so part of it is just increasing that awareness, and the goal is really aimed at encouraging and helping institutions to identify what those skills are and to make them aware of what they are, and more importantly, to make students aware of what they are so that they can then go out and tell employers, this is what I've got.
I just add one thing about related to that, the tuning project, because everyone here may not be familiar with that. But what was interesting when we first became involved in that a few years ago, we talked to some people from a history department in another state. And one thing they had learned, part of the tuning is seeing how your graduates connect with industry. And they found that there were actually employers that liked to hire their history majors. And this was an opportunity for them to find out why. And as I understood it, at least at that time, they looked at that and made sure that given that, they incorporated that into the curriculum for more students, because it was just by happenstance that some students took some courses along with their history major that made them very attractive to the employer. So it was an opportunity for them to think, is there a way we can at least advise our students that if you take this course or two outside the department, you will actually be very attractive to industry, but you'll still be a history major. And if you want to become a history teacher, you can. If you want to go to graduate or professional school, you can. But they saw that as an opportunity, and it had never occurred to them before. And so there's a way that contact with industry, whatever your field is, can help and inform you, and you still have the options as a department and as a faculty. Do you want to use that information or not? So the faculty still are the controlling factor in who they're producing and what they want them to be able to know and be able to do.
I'd like to ask, and maybe Mark's the right one to answer this, and this what I see is an increasingly globally competitive world where we're making, as you pointed out, this huge investment in human capital development. And so to me, it's increasingly the pressure is on to make that investment as productive as possible, match it with the job skills that are necessary to compete in this world. It's better than what we've done before. Can you look around the world, and is there anything to learn from how other people do it? I know I've always been somewhat intrigued by Germany, because when you look at their post-secondary attainment levels, they're somewhat low, at least the data on standardized data, and yet they have a very high-performing economy, which really gets into making career decisions and training at a much earlier age than maybe we would certainly feel comfortable with, but at least historically. But that's how they turn their investment into a highly productive workforce. So is there anything for us to learn that's really external that we're going to ultimately be forced to do because we're going to have to compete?
First, with a word of caution rather than so I am not a fan of a lot of the work that OECD puts out. I know that they get a lot of attention for PIAC and PISA, and I just want to before you start looking at them as an authoritative source, they will sell you lots of stuff, and a lot of it is just smoke and mirrors. They're very casual with data.
You and Steve will get along fine.
So just I'm glad. I'm glad that he endorses this suspicion. So I would say that, just like Texas thinks it's exceptional, America thinks it's exceptional, and to some degree we've been extremely lucky and extremely blessed. I think for me, one of the more interesting places that we should look is maybe Switzerland with regard to its apprenticeship programs. And so we're sort of backing into apprenticeships in this weird, the Dean Deal was talking about internships, right? So internships are actually, as you may know, are like total exploitation of young people who work for no pay, and they need to do this I think his quote was an extended interview, right? 6 months of free labor is a very long interview, right? But they are becoming they are becoming increasingly important. But apprenticeships to me are a more interesting alternative. Now I don't know. Florida has a recognized licensed apprenticeship program run by their higher education agency. And the data on it very impressive, but it's very small. In Switzerland, and I'm trying to dig up some facts about it, but I'm having a hard time. But I believe that almost everybody goes through these apprenticeship programs, and that they're looked at as so. One of the things that something I said earlier, that we really want to be careful that career and technical education doesn't become a ghetto.
Yes.
Right. But if almost all students go through some kind of apprenticeship program, and the links between industry and schools are much more formalized, and large numbers of people do it, then it's not a ghetto anymore. It's just become a part of the way into the labor market. And I think that's you as a state, the nation, so the president has talked about apprenticeship programs. Of course, he never followed up on it. But the fact of the matter is that at least every once in a while, the concept of apprenticeships pops up. And I think that this is. I don't know. Do you have formal recognition? No. So I think that this is as an immediate area to get some more information internationally. I think that's an area that you might want to take a look at. I think it could be much more productive than than this crazy internship programs that we're backing into, which are highly ghettoized because only middle class kids could afford to volunteer for such long periods of time.
You have to have a separate source of income, obviously, under that circumstance.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, this is a good chance to talk to both the board and Dr. Snyder. Open it up for questions. Yes, Ramon?
There are two areas that we haven't talked about when we look at marketable skills. One of them is with the people that already have the skills but with time might not have kept it up, and what we're going to do about adult and continuing education programs. And secondly, we have not talked about the folks that we've already lost or never had, the dropouts and adults without basic skills, without ability to speak in English, without the GED. And what we're going to do, if anything, in this committee about making recommendations in regards to adult basic education.
That's Raymond.
We have actually looked at those adults in those categories. We know that depending on the data that you cite, there's somewhere between 2 and 3 million functionally illiterate adults in Texas. When we had an active state P16 council a few years ago, we spent an entire year meeting with business leaders, and we asked a very simple question. What is the minimal level of academic achievement necessary to hold a job that pays a living wage? And the answer that came back to us, I think we started that when you were Commissioner, Shirley. And the answer that came back time and again was 8th grade. 8th grade reading, writing, and computational skills. We can hire people and pay them a living wage. And so here at the coordinating board, we said, maybe our aspirations are too high for certain categories of people. It's probably unrealistic to think that you're going to get a lot of 30-year-old single mothers who are reading at the 6th grade level and somehow get them through a post-secondary educational program, whether an associate's degree or a level 2 certificate. So we started thinking about how we develop different kinds of adult basic education programs that meet the different needs of people in different circumstances. And so we created something that is morphed into what we call Accelerate Texas, and it's intended to right fit people with certain kinds of jobs based on their circumstances. If they can't afford to go to school for 2 years to get a level 2 certificate, then how do we train them for the contemporary workforce? That's one thing that we've done. We've also developed this Grad Texas program, which is intended to re-enroll students who've acquired a significant number of college credits, 30, 45, 60 hours or more, but for some reason dropped out of school and never finished their credentials. We know, and this goes all the way back to a time when we hired the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, and they made it very clear to us, well, I forget which commission that was, Woody, that we're not going to be able to meet our skilled workforce needs simply by bringing in kids out of high school. We're going to have to recover these people that need adult basic education. We're going to have to recover a significant percentage of those students who had some college but never finished. So we're going to need a comprehensive strategy that targets all those groups, including the several you just mentioned.
And let me add that you have two goals. One, in terms of the 60% of the workforce of the 25 to 34-year-olds should have some level of college. Then the goal regarding the 500 and some odd thousand students that we need to have graduating in 2030. You cannot achieve those numbers without addressing this issue. So going forward, we need to address specific strategies to achieve these goals, and some of these things that the Commissioner just mentioned are prime for consideration. So probably beginning at the next meeting, we need to begin to have some specific discussions amongst the group in terms of what are some of the key strategies that the state should undertake to achieve some of the goals.
Achieve the 60%. I mean, we need a population number or projection from Steve. We've got an age category, 25 to 34. Within that, we don't have anybody that's, I mean, if we're shooting to 2030, those are all going to be new graduates, so we have to project that number. But then we'll have to recapture a portion of those that are outside the workforce today. But once again, we're still if we're really focused at 60% and 25 to 34, we're looking at a younger group of a population today that has not exited the education. So it's going to be a little bit different calculation than we were looking at a 25 to 64-year-old, where we know that we have to bring back 500,000-600,000 of those that have stopped their education well short of any kind of post-secondary attainment.
That's absolutely true for the 60%. The goal for the 500+ thousand, at least at this point, you haven't put an age range in there. And so even actually, I spoke briefly with the dean
so those are really two different, what you're saying is 60% at 25 to 34-year-old and 550,000 graduates are not necessarily, they're not mutually exclusive, but in the 550 would be actually some graduates that are outside that age category.
We have thousands of students in Texas. I spoke briefly with the dean. They're trying to get back students that have left UT and haven't finished. And we have many, many thousands more in the state. Grad Texas was designed for that. You have an unbelievable number of students who have completed 90 semester credit hours and have no credential other than a transcript.
Which would be a shortcoming of focusing on 25 to 34 without having some other goals that pick up the recovery and the other part of the older part of the workforce.
I think that $500,000, $515,000 student. I wish it were that expensive.
What picks up that?
$550,000 student goal will pick up those students, and we're doing all the things that the commissioner mentioned. And actually years ago, I heard Steve Murdoch over at the LBJ school, and he was making the point in terms of the certificates that for a lot of students, your first time in college, that really sets up the next generation. Mm-hmm. And so you create the economic means for each succeeding generation to be more successful, and maybe to continue in the same track, but provides that economic means. But we do have thousands and thousands of students that have made a huge personal investment in going to college, not just the time, but the dollars, and they have debt. The states put hundreds of millions of dollars into their education, yet they don't have a credential yet. So we do need to get them back into the fold. And then we have many more students that, we're just talked about in terms of the ABE, that we don't have the adequate resources that we need to empower and get into a more productive stream for them for a lifetime.
So
yes or no?
Just a follow-up comment. We talked about instructional television, and I think that from my personal experience in adult education, you can never have enough money for the faculty members that you would need to educate the people that need those courses. We always had a waiting list in Laredo. I mean, to see people that supposedly don't have time to come to school on a waiting list that sometimes is 6 months or a year in length because they're trying to learn how to speak English or because they're trying to get a GED. And I think that the only way we can do that and reach large masses of people is with instructional television. And I think the same thing with keeping up with the skills. I've learned, I think, from Bob Villa and the DIY channel, more about carpentry and math than I learned in basic math skills.
Yes, Jerry.
I'm having trouble sort of visualizing how we would articulate a marketable skills goal. Did you do that in closing the gaps?
No, we did not. We did not have such a goal. And the way it was structured, if we could go back to that, we didn't believe that we could tell people precisely how to do it, that we think there are many different ways of doing it. And the philosophy, at least we're trying to maintain with this plan, is what we had before, is set the general goal and then let institutions find ways that fit their students the best and their resources to achieve that goal. But by 2030, that we would hope that all the students have identifiable marketable skills, whatever program they're graduating from, and that they know what they are. And it's essentially help encouraging institutions to put more concentrated effort into this as part of what they do, but at the same time not push out the fact that they need to know their chemistry, they need to know their sociology, and that you can't predict their skills. Students will enter with their only goal may be to get a job, but by the time they graduate, they know that they may really want to go to Stanford or Caltech, whichever institution they started, and be able to follow that. But have some more conscious effort. And my personal view is that many students have more marketable skills than they realize, and they take certain things for granted. Some of the things Mark has mentioned, for a younger group of students, many of them have these skills and they take them for granted, and they don't know anyone would ever be interested in the fact that they know how to use Excel or they know how to use PowerPoint, because it's second nature to them. And so in some cases, it's just a matter of pointing out that you need to let employers know, if you're going directly to the work, that you have these skills and you know how to present and these types of things. In other cases, through the way you instruct, you can help make sure you develop these within your field. So, even as a chemist, even if you become that faculty member, at some point you have to communicate either with industry or your fellow chemists in the field in a meaningful way, or you're not going to progress. If you don't, but you still need the real hard technical skills. But if you can't communicate to anyone, you're even there, you've got a problem.
Jerry, I just want to say very quickly that maybe one of the ways we could get at this goal is to, instead of quantifying the marketable skills, make certain that every student that goes to a public college or university is exposed to certain kinds of experiences that presumably would lead to a higher level of marketable skills. For example, paid internships, and I share your misgivings about these volunteer internships that students often take. I believe in tying academic credit to these paid internships. I believe that we ought to create more courses like the one that Randy Deal talked about, but make them mandatory so that you don't just reach 5% of the students. I knew what the answer to the question was when I asked him what percentage of students actually benefit from these courses. There's an increasing body of evidence that we have gone way too far in making a college experience, whether it's a community college in most disciplines or it's a university, just a cafeteria of different dishes or different experiences you can have. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that we need to narrow the choices that students have before them, because more choices, more confusion, and we need to be much more prescriptive in directing students through some kind of undergraduate credential. And that's what we had in mind, that the marketable skills goal would be in terms of exposing students to certain kinds of academic experiences or certain kinds of business or job experiences while they're in higher education rather than quantifying the actual skills.
So it may well be that you would identify that particular thing as a strategy to get to this goal.
Right.
And
it's more about a strategy than quantifying something.
Mark?
So we're always faced with this tight loose problem, right? You know, how tight do you want the guidelines to be? How tight do you want the prescription of the methods and the programs to be? And I mean, we face this all the time, right? You know, so we have a goal, and then the question is, you know, what are the sub bullets underneath that, and how tight are the sub bullets underneath it, right? You must do this, you must do that, and to the extent to which you get very tight regulations or recommending tight regulations, you get more pushback, and you actually may be restricting innovation or inventiveness. So I'll come back to a theme I mentioned earlier. I mean, to what extent is the right thing to do to get there is to say with identifiable marketable skills measured by job placement and earnings that are benchmarked so that they are, you know, that they're comparable across like institutions or like students, and then you don't get in the business of saying you must have liberal arts 101 or paid internships or anything like that. You just put the money on the table, the incentive on the table, and you say, you know, you have to improve this outcome. And you get rewarded if you do it, and you get punished if you don't do it. And we're not going to tell you what these are or how to get there. You have a lot of public institutions, you know, and this is a huge state with lots of different regional markets and things like that. So you just say we reward the schools that are doing a better job than others.
Yeah, and staff still see the potential for having as a target, as a state, not for individual institutions, but as a state, something tied into whether people were employed or not and that type of thing. And so it wouldn't be a point at any particular institution, but we have the data to do that. And actually, I'm encouraged. One side benefit of today's discussion is we are now going to be working with the College of Liberal Arts at UT Austin to help provide them with information on what's happening with their graduates when they leave. We can do that more. We need to be doing, but all of that doesn't have to end up in the plan. But I think you can have strategies that point people in certain directions, and I think some people may, you know, allowing for innovation, find better ways of doing some of this stuff, so long as we end up at this point and provide the opportunity for that. And I think there's still value, in my personal view, that employers know that graduates from this institution bring certain unique things to the table, and from another institution, other unique things to the table, despite the degree looks to be the same, but they have certain things they do at Brownsville that may be different from Pan American that are attractive in their own ways, even though the degree label is the same, but they're getting to marketable skills. I think there's still a value in having that in higher ed.
Yeah, I would support an accountability provision in this particular point that we're dealing with of the type that Mark outlined. I think a broad-scale accountability measure is the right way to go. I think it would be also appropriate for us to verbalize a list of skills, of skill types that we think are important. I don't think any of us thinks that the need to communicate is likely to evaporate as a need in the future. And there are others that we could put into a reasonable list. I would urge us to resist the idea of designing a curriculum for the state at this level. I think that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. We shouldn't say that there should be in every institution some particular course taught at some level. The institution should be given the drive to innovate, and they're already getting that drive from parents and students themselves, but I think we need to add to that drive, and I think Mark's accountability measure is a good way to start.
Yes, sir, Steve.
One question or one item about, I don't disagree with what Larry just said, but I do think we need to look at that within institutional context, meaning in the context of the types of students that you get. In other words, you can expect me to do so many things, but you can't expect me to do the same thing with a student who has this level of preparation and versus this level. And we have a vast difference across the universities in Texas in terms of what freshmen look like, in terms of SAT and ACT scores, that sort of thing. I think we'd have to not put one set of expectations and say everybody's got to do the same, because I'm going to tell you what happens, because it's happened time and time and time again, is that UT Austin and A&M will look much better than any other institutions. It's happened, I don't know how many times in my lifetime, and David's going to say that's not true on such and such a time, but I'll match him twice for every once he gives me.
I can outdo you, actually, this is interesting.
Yeah, but I'm just, all I'm saying is that I think we'd have to look at that. The other thing I think important to Ramon's thing is he is absolutely right. We can't get where you want to get if we leave the folks he's talking about behind. And in order for us to address that, we've got to address something here that, is, I don't know, something that no one wants to mention in this room. But that is, we've got to also consider, as we talk about this, talk about increasing rather than decreasing, which we did from 2000 to 2010, the amount of state appropriation spent on higher education. Mm-hmm. Because that is the reality. When you do it in 2,000 constant dollars and you compare it, we actually spent less. You can't spend less with more students and expect to come up with the same response. That's not some liberal-eyed academic. That's just any business person would say the same thing. And so I think particularly when we look at the roots that Ramon's talking about, if we're going to look at that, which I think as a state we can't get there. We can't get there. And in fact, as you go across time, it'll be more and more difficult if we're not addressing this group that needs assistance at that level for us to meet these goals. We're going to have to look at what we can do, and we're going to have to look at the possibility of actually saying we need to spend more money in higher education in Texas.
Steve, I wonder if I can follow up on your comments about the accountability measure and how it's likely to look different from different types of institutions. That's absolutely right, and it might be that that we need to reinforce the idea that what's really important in that measure inside one institution is what the trends are.
Yeah.
Which way is it going?
Yep.
Not how does it look relative to UT Austin.
Yeah.
But in the long run, you obviously would like to get to some acceptable level everywhere, but and maybe that's practical. I don't know, but we don't want the public debate to be all about how it's different from institution to institution. We want the public debate to be how we're using this measure to improve what we're doing.
That's right. And I had just what I really wanted to say, Steve, was the point that I thought we were talking about an aggregate measure, not an institution by institution measure. But I do think in terms of your example that this is one area where schools that you're talking about who may be more difficult for the students to graduate. But if you look at the employment data looks much better than one would think at many of these schools in terms of the salaries, because of the difficulty of the students paying for their education. They're working their way through schools, and many times because of that experience, those first-time salaries look higher than one would guess. And I actually, the first time we ran, I was really surprised at several institutions in the state, and it was because their students were employed all the way through school, and when they came out, their salaries were many times $6,000, $7,000 higher than than Austin or A&M.
Wasn't it also true that relative to their income, their debts were often higher?
Absolutely, and that's why we want to have this other measure in terms of debt. That's very important, and they should have some reasonable expectation. We've got some updated information for the end of the meeting on that and why it's important. But we've been in our accountability system. We broke into groups years ago because of this very issue, because it wasn't right that a school where no one's gone, all of its students, their parents have never gone to college before and they're very poor, should be compared to UT Austin or A&M, and so we've been conscious of that a long time. But I do think, as an aggregate measure, it can be fair to everyone. And I'm wanting to say this because I think we need to be fair to these other schools whose students are doing much better in the marketplace than some people believe they're doing.
And by the way, this is not just a Texas phenomenon. So in most states, many regional campuses, the students that are in the job market that are picked up again in the UI data are doing better than graduates from the flagships that are in the marketplace. Now, I mean, again, we have to take into account that many more students from UT Austin are going to go to graduate school, right? But of the students from UT Austin that are working in the state or that are picked up in the UI data, their salaries are just about at the state median, and there are campuses, and I'm sorry, I can't remember them, but we reported this. I can't remember which ones, but there are many regional campuses that are doing far better. And so one other thing, by the way, in terms of the accountability measure, performance budgeting systems do this already for different kinds of students, right? I mean, they take into account the race, income, and have targets and rewards based on different classes of students. I mean, so I'm not necessarily in favor of that kind of multiple cells, but it is possible to adjust these kinds of measures and then come up with a measure that does account for the education the family education, income, and things like that.
And to get to Steve's second question there, and which we touched on yesterday in testimony at the House Higher Education Committee, as a part of our process of trying to build political support, as we saw from Stan Jones's presentation in August, if you're in your family income's in the lower quartile, you've got a 10% chance of getting to a 4-year degree, and if you're in the upper quartile, it's almost 80%. So, and we know in this state that we've got a significant part of our students with family incomes and that are Hispanic and African American, and they're in the lower 2 quartiles of our and the Anglo population is heavily represented in who have fewer children and a declining number of children, as we know because it's your data, in the upper quartile. So we have this mismatch of ethnicity based on where we need completions and where the resources are. It's a political process to try to get one group to essentially transfer assets to support others, even though if we're going to have a successful outcome as a state in terms of quality of life for all of our citizens, that's what has to take place. My own view is we need to really focus on coming up with the best possible policies that can argue over time for increased investment if we're going to try to accomplish what you want to happen there. I mean,
all I'm saying is that looking at data for us and other states, there should be no misunderstanding that we somehow are over-investing relative to the country or to other places. That simply is not true. And so, just a hard look at the data, and I could give you the table number in my book if I could remember it, will show you that this last semester has been very difficult in funding in appropriated funds for higher education in Texas. Right. And to go forward, even though we've got some slowdown in growth in some groups, the reality of it is the challenges are going to be greater, and anyone who expects us to just, and I'm not in that game now, but expects it to be done with less money, I don't understand, because we're being told we need to use a business perspective, and a business perspective would not be that you could produce the same product and spend much less money doing it. It would be ideal to have it happen, but I just don't see how it can.
Particularly as a state, as you know, we have the bigger challenge of any other state because of a higher concentration of underperforming ethnic groups, and we've got a bigger spread, but in terms of averages between the historically dominant Anglo population and the minority population versus national averages. So we've got a bigger gap, we got a higher concentration, and all the growth, over 100% of the growth, is in those groups. So the outcome would argue, that you'd have to spend more than who you're competing with because we got a bigger challenge. But I think the process here is to try to come up with as many good policy recommendations that hopefully lead to a decision to what degree those are going to be financially supported.
And to just add into Steve's funding point, I'd like to point out some of you in other roles have heard about the Maryland Compact, in which they made a big point about they would do certain things and they wouldn't ask for more funding for higher education. As staff here looked at that, we thought, gee, everybody in Texas would agree to that immediately because they're funded so much more per FTSE that would be a huge gain. I don't recall what it was, but it probably would have been about at least 40 or 50% more per student was being spent in Maryland. At that, they agreed not to ask for more. So when you look at other states, there is a significant difference in funding.
Yes, Lori.
I think this discussion has kind of come full circle back to the discussion about UT Brownsville and Pan Am and Rio Grande as compared to other perhaps flagship universities. If you look at school districts across the state, whether urban or rural or suburban, as much as 80 to 90% of the student body are labeled at risk because of economics. Not just their ethnicity, but more importantly, on every measure, it's about they are on free and reduced lunch. They are children of parents who are not well educated, many of whom are not literate. They're pre-literate, if anything. So when we think about measuring marketable skills, I would submit that looking at whether it's the Valley, where the majority of those students are first-time students in college, they are children of parents who probably are not from this country. They probably are first-generation American citizens. I would think that one measure would be to look at those students who typically stay in their communities after graduation and the economic impact of a, McAllen or a Donna or a Edinburgh area, the economic impact measured through their chambers of commerce or through their employers, I would think would be significantly higher than the economic impact of students graduating from flagship universities across the state that then scatter back to their homes or go to graduate school or whatever. So it seems to me that we should not discount the fact that a Pan Am or a Brownsville or Rio Grande or whatever it's called now, and certainly the work of community colleges in those areas throughout the state would have a more significant impact on the economy of those communities than any other students that would graduate from a more prestigious university where the demographics of that university are not first generation, are not poor students for the most part.
Well, I don't have the micro data for the Valley, but I can tell you for El Paso, which is very similar, and that we're a net exporter once you graduate from high school. Mm-hmm. So when you get to college and more advanced degrees, the percentage just goes up. So we're essentially funneling the labor supply of the other major regions of the state.
Sure you are.
So we're not having the impact on a local basis of highly trained, marketable, skilled graduates because we do not have the demand on complex jobs within the economy to the extent that we need to have. So that's a challenge for our parts of the state that are different than, say, in Austin, who has a supply issue, but they've got the demand. They're worried about the supply. Part of that supply is being filled by the graduates out of the Valley and out of West Texas. So, okay, we're going to run behind time if we don't stop and have lunch and then immediately reconvene so we can conclude.
Steve, was Mark adding that to this goal measure that he's going to bring? Was he kind of suggesting that and borrowing that?
I think so.
Because I don't.
I'll be able to do it.
Woody, while we're waiting on David, can I just ask one thing? I was trying to get him before we left. Mark mentioned on our goal that we had up there, the marketable skills goal, I thought I heard him say we should consider adding measured by job placement and wage. And I clarified, and he said, yes, I was encouraging you to add that.
Right.
So just at some point, if staff could make a note of that.
Yeah. Right, and I think that
discussion.
Was Dr. Faulkner. It was reinforced that we don't need to micromanage this issue. That we need to lay it out. We need to measure it, and then we need to let our institutions figure out how they deliver a marketable as measured by 1, 3, 5, 10 year outcomes as far as their graduates. David, anything else to say on workforce marketable skills before we move on to the student cost goal?
My sense is that the committee is comfortable with a goal focusing on marketable skills, and if I'm wrong, it's a good time to let me know. Otherwise, we'll develop some specific targets, and then in the future you can talk more extensively about specific strategies to help get to the goal. And remember, the idea is to have a few key strategies for the state, but not to tell people exactly what to do. So with that, I think we can move on. We've got some data related to the debt goal that we think may be helpful. We may not be fully there yet, but we think we're answering some specific questions that the committee raised last time.
As everybody might remember, at the August meeting that we had a good bit of discussion around the student cost goal, and I think at that time we had just thrown out by 2030 the average undergraduate student loan debt of graduates from Texas public colleges and universities would be no greater than 50% of the average first year wage for graduates. I think we had a good bit of discussion around that. In a sense, at least in my view, when we set that as a goal, we're essentially sending a message back to both the institutions and to the legislature that if the appropriations aren't high enough or the efficiency isn't great enough at the institutional level, we won't be able to hit that goal. So I think it's a legitimate discussion on how precise we want to be there, because we are sending a pretty strong signal. So. But I think we all thought some type of goal around student debt was important. And so with that, I will turn it over to Julie and Ginger for continue the discussion.
Thank you very much. I actually I think this is a little too close. I was grateful to Dr. Deal this morning because he spent some time talking about how important it is to connect the dots and for liberal arts majors to be able to connect the dots. And we had actually been sent back by all of you after the last meeting in August to think about connecting the dots a little better in terms of the student cost goal and why it's important, especially a goal that looks at student debt. So this illustration, I hope, provides a good evidence of why we think it's important to have a goal tied to student cost that impacts all three of these very important elements related to student affordability. The state plays an important role in terms of funding, in terms of formula funding as well as grants and statewide policies. Students play a role in terms of the cost of their education, in terms of whether they're financially informed, the amount of time they take to graduate, how they approach their degree and borrowing. And obviously institutions play a very important role in terms of the costs of education and student debt. So we again came back to the fact that we thought this was a goal that really would allow us to see what's happening across these three very important areas in terms of college affordability. In your packets, we did provide for you an updated handout, and we were asked many specific questions, and we have a lot of detail there regarding some of your questions, but we have a couple of key pieces of information and data that you asked us for that we wanted to share with you today. I believe it was Dr. Faulkner and Dr. Murdoch who were interested in how much a student's first-year salary would be dedicated to loan repayment. So we took a look at this for bachelor's degrees. Obviously, we had to make some assumptions for this, but we took, of the examples we gave you at the last meeting, we took psychology, which had the lowest first-year wage, and engineering, which had the highest, and took a look at what a loan payment would look like for the average debt in terms of what students are making when they graduate, what percent of salary that would be. And you can see there's a pretty big difference. For psychology majors, it was 17 to about 20% based on the loan, on the interest rate of the loan, and for engineering majors, it was just 7 to 8%. And obviously, statewide showed up somewhere in between those two.
Are these our actual debt being carried out of those degree programs?
Do you want to respond to that? Yes, this is.
So these aren't an individual person's wage or an individual person's debt. This is the average wage of a degree earner and an average debt of the degree earners.
But you have debt data by degree program.
Yes, we have student level data.
Psychologists are taking out of.
Yes, we have the student level data by degree program.
Do you have?
Correct.
And yes. Maybe I'm sorry, I was out for a minute. But do you have that so that it's the average debt for those with debt?
That's correct. This does not include students who do not have debt.
Good. Okay.
Which was also not included in some of the calculations that we've done for the main goal. We've just looked at students who have debt.
12% of students do not.
Okay. Another thing that we were asked to look at was what does having debt mean for students who are graduating, especially those with larger amounts of debt. So this is an illustration. Again, we had to make some assumptions because we thought it was important to look at also high school graduates. I think this illustration does show the value of a college education. But what this indicates is that for a student graduating, I believe we did it for a psychology degree, we looked at how long it would take someone to save up to buy for a house, and we based it on, I think, a $200,000 house and a $20,000 down payment. And Paul, I think if you want to talk a little bit about the specifics of that.
Sure. So what we did was we compared what a high school student, just a high school graduate, would make after 4 years in the workplace compared to first-year wage for a psychology major who graduated and goes into the workplace. And, of course, we have the data for psychology majors on what they do between 1, 5, and 10 years. So we took that into account when we scaled this out. We treated the college graduates as if they were going to live like high school students. So everybody here is living at the same salary. So this is a very, very, very aggressive savings approach, but it was really the only way to make it comparable. So everybody's living at the same amount, and there are some estimates out there for how to budget. 15% is a good savings goal, but instead of using the 15% for the savings goal for the college graduate, we took the difference between what they would have made as a high school graduate compared to what they're making now that they're a college graduate. And that differential money is what we assumed that they would save. Now, for the college student without debt, they could save all their differential salary for their down payment. And for the one with debt, they had to deduct out the money that they're paying for loans.
Okay, so just as you can see, those students without debt were able to save more quickly than those with debt, but the high school graduates, it was going to take them the longest.
So this would be,
Yes.
how long would it take them to save $20,000? Is that kind of what?
Right, based on a high school, the salary, right, from the high school. So that, someone may still be living in their parents' basement, but but we did use a similar salary for all students. I'm sorry, a similar savings rate. Now, we also were asked to look at loan default rates because you were all very interested in whether there were differences in default rates, especially by students who graduate and students who don't. And we are very grateful to the folks at Texas Guarantee who were able to provide us some information that we didn't have available here about default rates. We have information about students who have state loans, but not some of the federal loans. So what you will see here is that you have, for those students who didn't graduate, especially at the lowest borrowing levels, we have a very high default rate. A quarter of those students are defaulting, as you can see, in the lowest rates. Many of those students maybe came in for just a semester. As we move across time, you can see that the Texas rates are actually lower than the national default rates. And again, we still have a higher rate for those students who didn't graduate than those students who do, which will, of course, be a challenge for those students moving on. Okay, and there is more detail about this in your packets. And I think one of the most important things you asked us to do, and we really thought about it as we were shaping the goal, was look at the data that we had brought to you by quartile. So we brought you a goal that looked at loan debt to first year wage, and we had just been looking at an average loan debt to average wage. But what we did is we broke this up. We broke up the information to quartile. We took, for students, we did a loan debt to wage for each individual students, and we laid it out in quartiles. And as you can see, the median is just about 60% in terms of where we are now. But students at the highest quartile were borrowing over 115% of their first year wage in terms of their loan when they graduated. And then students at the lowest quartile were just at 28%. So we thought this was useful in terms of seeing the spread and seeing there actually are some pretty big differences in terms of our graduates coming out. And this is for all graduates, not just bachelor's degree graduates.
Julie, you're saying the highest earning graduate borrowed not only an absolute more money, but as a percentage of their wage. They borrowed 115% versus the lower earning.
So for the highest quarter of students, they were
highest
all
quarter being highest income.
Yes, the highest income. I'm sorry. The debt. This is the debt to wage. So what first year wage? It's a ratio. So students in the highest quarter were borrowing over 115%. Their overall loan was over 115% of their first year wage. So if they were making $30,000, they borrowed, in the low 30s. Versus the students at the lowest end were making much more in their first year wage than what they borrowed for their education.
It's a quartile of what?
The debt to income. It's a quartile of the debt to income ratio. So what we did is we took all students, and we very simply said, okay, we're going to take for each student what your debt to income ratio is. How much did you borrow, and what were you making when in your first year wage? And then we laid that out in quartiles, and this is the result. And we show you the boundaries here between quartiles.
Right, but so the quartiles are income or amount of money borrowed?
It's a ratio.
It's a ratio.
Yes.
That's two quartiles.
So quartile 1 are going to be your students who either borrowed very little, and so even if they have a low wage, their ratio is on the low end, or they may have borrowed a lot, but they are making a very high wage. So 28% of their income in first year is what they actually owe. So it's on the very low end. You can see those students.
Just trying to really show us the spread around the median then.
Exactly. We're trying to show you the spread because you asked us to take a look at what this meant, the ratio meant in terms of quartiles. So we have some students who are borrowing, quite a bit compared to their wage, and that's why, as we thought about the goal And we looked at data for several years earlier, and we saw that we actually look very similar to this, which is something that we talked about before. So we talked about the fact that an approach to this goal that says we want to remain constant, that we want, given that this is where we've been, we want to remain here. We don't want a situation where students are getting into the situation where they're borrowing more and more. So we think it's probably important to track and see how we're doing with these quartiles, but we also set the goal, again, at the median, which is the 60%. So if you look at the revised goal that we're bringing to you today, it is for this ratio to remain at a median of 60%. So this is slightly different than the 50% goal that we brought to you, that looked at the averages and said we wanted to reduce to 50%. The more we looked at the data, the fact that a lot of things have remained constant, we compared to other states, we looked at information about students paying back their loans and all of that. We thought the best approach was to have a goal that said in 2030, 15 years from now, or 16, we want to be where we are now in terms of this median, in terms of where students are in borrowing and then moving on to the workforce and making enough money to pay it back. And so that was why we came up with this choice, that we want to be able to keep this steady. But watch this goal, as we talked about on the first slide, with how we were able to see through debt this ratio, how it is reflected changes to what institutions are doing, what students are doing, and what the state is doing could all impact this student debt goal. And we wanted to make sure that it's something that remains the same and we don't see an escalation there.
Could I have a question? So this, so the thing that, sorry. One of the things that is missing in this equation is the interest rate.
What?
Right? So actually, given that student loan interest rates are extremely low now, if you borrow the same amount as your first year earnings at current interest rates, you're paying about 10% of your gross wages to pay off, to service your debt. But if interest rates go up, which they will, then the amount of money that you're paying for your loan in relation to your gross income is going to increase dramatically. So this may be, and actually 60% is a very reasonable number, a very nice number, but you're not taking into account the cost of the loan, at least in this goal.
We don't have information. We don't know where interest rates are going to go. As I said, we looked at this for several years to see where it stood, and it was fairly constant. We also know that wages may very well go up over time, and we may see inflation. If we do that, wages will probably go up, interest rates will go up. We did the illustration we showed you earlier at a 5.25% and an 8.25%, just to give you the sense of the difference that would make. So there are a lot of factors that we can't necessarily control for, but we thought that this debt-to-income ratio provides a balance, a way for us to monitor over time student debt, and is education getting to the point where it's so expensive that students, when they come out and get a job, it's really difficult for them to start to pay back their loans, and then again over time to pay back those loans.
And let me also add, I don't think microphone, but I'm attempting to be. I feel like karaoke night. Okay, here we go. I just wanted to add that we actually don't have that data. So this ratio is just what you borrowed and what you make. Right. We don't know what the interest rates are now, and as Julie mentioned, we won't know what they are because that's the nature of our data. So while it's true, we're not.
What the interest rates are.
Well, but we don't have that accounted for because we're just looking at our data source.
Well, you had it accounted for earlier on. You had the payments, but you don't have it in the ratio, right?
We made a lot of assumptions.
Right. We made assumptions about what interest rates would be, not what students owed. We know what students owe when they graduate, but we had to make some assumptions about at these various interest rates, this is what their payment would be. But I think Ginger makes a very good point that this is about when you come out, this is how much you owe and what you're making. There's a lot of things we can't we won't know for the future, but I think this is a good way to monitor some of those things. And if interest rates really escalate, that's going to be a problem for students. That's something that we're going to look at and say, okay, we need to think about how to address this, strategies for this, because this is affecting our students' ability to pay back. And we can think about targets and those types of things moving forward.
Does this make the case for students focusing on high-wage degrees?
Oh yeah, I was going to say I believe it does, because students, as we looked at the wheel with the balance, students have some control about the decisions they make, and if students opt to pursue a degree that's high wage, then they're going to be those students who, when they come out, even if they borrow a lot, their balance is going to be better than students who opt for a degree that's low wage, and they're going to come out and again, if they borrow the same amount, the ratio is going to look very different for those students. That's going to be reflected in these data. So students have some control. Certainly institutions have control in terms of trying to advise students correctly. The amount of time a student takes to graduate can very much affect what they borrow, the amount of money they borrow. We have looked at that data. So institutions and students together, if they can improve time to degree and efficiency to degree, guided pathways, we've been hearing about those types of things, that can absolutely make a difference in terms of what they owe when they graduate because of what they borrowed. So certainly choices about what students are going to major in is going to make a difference, but also choices that they make, that the institution makes, about helping them get through efficiently, understanding and being informed about the choices that they can make about degrees, about borrowing, about their pathways. All of those things I think will show in this goal, as well as what the state is contributing. Because as we said with the state, fund wisely. We have state funding for grants. We have state policies that impact, student pathways, and we have our formula funding. So that's obviously, those monies will make a difference too, because if students are having to pay a lot for tuition, if grants aren't there, then they're going to have to borrow more, and we'll see that also in this goal.
A million years ago when I went to college, my first 2 years, I thought I wanted to study journalism and that kind of a thing, and I was working in an entry-level job in first-generation IT. I was a tape ape, I think they called me. But the real world journalists would come into our classrooms and they would say, now, you really have to love this because there's not much money in it. And I grew up dirt poor, so over a little bit of time, I said, I've got to get out of here. And I changed over to a degree out of the business school that focused on management information systems. So I just think that this makes, particularly for first generation students at least, who grew up under dire circumstances, that maybe they should focus on high wage degrees if they're going to spend the time and the effort. Why not?
Jim? I would think that student loan debt is inversely proportional to state funding. In other words, state funding goes down, student loan debt will likely go up. Does this assume a constant amount of state funding, or are we assuming it's going to decrease or increase?
Actually, state funding, I believe, has changed since we, in terms of the period of time that we'd been looking at this, but it remained fairly constant, which I think is an interesting point. We can go back earlier. I think we went back 10 years and see what the changes look like in terms of the state funding. I think you do see, as in some of the data Paul showed you at the last meeting, for community colleges, for example, we saw some of the tax base increasing to pick up the slack for when the state funding went down, so maybe that would help balance, and students might be borrowing the same. But it is obviously different. It's a balancing.
It's the balancing. It doesn't assume that. What it does is it says if we want this relationship to stay at this level, you're going to have to take into account all these other factors. What level is the state funding? How much are you putting into grants? What are tuition and fees? All these things interact. in terms of resulting in this relationship. And remember, this is the students with debt. We still have, I understood Paul when I asked him earlier, about 37% without debt. And that's the debt levels are going to be very different at community colleges because the Pell Grants go so much further to covering. They will, in fact, cover the tuition and fees. They won't cover the cost of living. And so it's going to vary depending on which sector you're in. But this is the general level for the state overall. But all those things figure in. So the points Steve's brought up about funding and others have brought up about other aspects come into play to achieve this. But it's to say that this is out here, this is sort of our compass point. This is what we want to look to, and however these things come, and you can pull and shift in different ways, but we still want to end up at this level because the student should be able to go into the marketplace after work, earn a reasonable living, have a reasonable opportunity to own a home, get out of debt very quickly if they're in fact in debt.
Well, it's a public policy statement around what's, at least in my view, kind of a public-private partnership of higher education between the individual and their contribution, the institution and their role, and the state is the largest donor and regulator. And essentially, we would be making a public policy recommendation here if we wanted to include that in the calculations around of state funding, and obviously in between the student and state appropriations is tuition. So, but I think that's a role that this committee should play. Larry, did you have?
Yeah, I wanted to raise a question about that language. Will remain at a median of 60%. When I first saw that, the first thing I thought was, well, that says we shouldn't let it get higher. It also says we shouldn't let it get lower.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
I mean, there's an argument that the economy would have greater vitality if we
will not exceed.
On the other hand, there's also an argument that because of relative weakness of public funding of higher education, maybe our first place is not actually to lower debt. But is that the language we want?
Larry, I have the same reaction on that. And instead of saying will remain at, it should be at 60% or less. I think that would, in my estimation, give you the incentive to keep it going down if at all possible. And it's been my feeling all along as I've taken the data that we have and so on, that the thing that we really need to do is get students in and out faster. I mean, that reduces debt, that reduces the cost of the universities, and everything we aim at, we ought to just try and get them in and out with their degrees as fast as we possibly can.
That's a really important point, and we will be proposing targets which underneath will I don't know if you have those with you, it may be on the sheet, but would actually say that students will finish, X percent of the students will finish their degrees within, I don't remember what we have, but that they would have, that you really need to finish in a more timely fashion. So if it's a 120-hour degree, you can just read it.
We have 80. It was 80% of students completing a degree will not exceed 60 semester credit hours for associate degrees and 120 semester credit hours for bachelor's degrees.
It's at exactly your point. And I would say we actually had a little wording that was a little more straightforward last time. That I think where we said that student debt will not exceed or have less than 60% of the first year income, which is a little bit more straightforward language than what we have here now.
And we can go back and work on the language.
We had some fairly straightforward language. I think we've added in some words about ratio and whatever that you don't really need to make the same point.
Mr. Chairman, we haven't debated those semester hour limits, and I'd just like to go on record that I'd like to debate them at some point.
We will, coordinating staff is...
Those are legislatively set numbers at this point, so we can debate that, but those come from law at this
80%?
point.
No.
We can debate that.
Yeah.
The 120 hours and the 60 hours are, with exception of by certain fields, and the idea is for students not to, right now at the community colleges, the students it's about 90 hours to complete 60-hour or maybe a little bit higher degree, and at universities it's about 140 to complete a 120-hour degree. And so, and those extra hours cost the student in terms of debt, and they cost the student and the state in terms of dollars. And so,
I just want to make it realistic, but it seems to me that that's not an issue we ought to get into right now. It flew by last time. We didn't actually talk about those data and how realistic they are. I would like to have that discussion at least offline.
Right. Well, I think we can schedule it at a future meeting, and we can look at external inputs to present at that meeting if we can feel there's some value added there.
And now that I think we're getting at least reasonably settled on the goals, I think it's time to share with you potential targets underneath, and that would be part of that discussion. That may not be appropriate to have that one at this time, but we need to have it. Those are the things that help you measure the plan as you go forward at some point, and it gives some direction, but it doesn't say people have to do that, but it's a plus.
D?
UTEP may be a bit of an anomaly for you all on the length of time and debt, because the UTEP student body, as I understand it, reflects the demographics of El Paso, which is predominantly Hispanic. It's over 70% in their demographics. They take longer to graduate and they have lower debt than anyone. Mm-hmm. They are totally averse to debt for the most part. And it does take them longer to graduate, but they're working their way through the entire time. So, we go back and forth on this length of time, but if they don't have the funds going in, my concern would be if we force the issue on time, that you're going to have fewer attending.
I think a little different than what Bob was talking about when we were talking about the hours. You could complete the 120 hours in 8 years, but the reality is most people who take longer to graduate take far more hours. And so the idea is you can work with that, but you don't want them accumulating more debt and more hours just because they're staying in school longer. And so there's an important nuance there, but it's really more than a nuance. It plays out in a very real way in terms of student debt. And we can tell you that if you take 2 or 3 more years to graduate, you're likely to take at least 5 more courses than you would have if you.
UTEP may be an outlier on that. That's just the data.
No. We're not really talking about the same thing, really. I'm talking about the hours accumulated versus the time, and UTEP is much like every place else, though. When you take longer, you do take more hours, and there are reasons for that. And
their debt ratio is so low.
Yeah. But that's not necessarily a good thing. In other words, we shouldn't view debt other than as a tool to try to accomplish a goal. And if that's a way of accelerating graduation and getting someone into the workforce earlier, then it's just like a business or you would use, or in buying your own house, you use debt to accomplish a goal. And it's just when it gets misused that it becomes an issue, and certainly public policy, you don't want to encourage misuse. And I think we're trying to lay out some guidelines here that could be helpful.
Exactly. And from an advising standpoint, some students may not know, and it'd be individual cases. Some students might be better off to borrow some money for 1 year and graduate 3 years sooner because they're realizing the economic return much sooner than if they take longer to graduate. And especially first time in college, students are not as likely to understand that. Now that won't work for everyone, but in many cases, even if they're at that low end, they're a psychology major making $24,000, $25,000 a year, that's $75,000 of income they've left on the table by taking 3 years longer to graduate.
Yeah.
Borrow the money and get out.
Right.
Woody, could I ask a question?
Yeah. Oh, yes, Jerry.
I think this is very complicated, and could we accomplish the same thing if we said that by 2030 the average student loan in real dollars will have decreased by 5% or whatever the number is from the average student loan as of whatever the base date is?
Here's one, and I sort of regret this was made a little bit more complicated than the last time we presented it. If it's 60% of the mean first-year salary for students, that's fairly straightforward. And what it accomplishes is you don't have to make adjustments for inflation and various other factors that you would with that type of measure. And I think we've added in a few words here that just make this seem more complicated than it really is.
The only adjustment you'd make to mine is you would just say, you would apply the rate of inflation to the amount of debt. So to me, that would be a much more straightforward way to articulate it. There are a lot of variables in terms of salary for psychology majors and electrical engineers. I mean, all that stuff gets awfully complicated.
Yeah, well, we were talking about just being the mean for all of those areas. And so right now it's $33,000. And so some people, engineering is much higher. As psychology, we all know, is lower now. And so if it were done by major, it would be much more complicated. And then you could even talk about where do you live, and the salaries vary by where you live. But I mean, if the other way is a better way of approaching it, I mean, it's the committee's recommendation for a goal.
Yeah. I think we ought to add this, and we could add both, and Jerry suggested, as well as this one. I mean, we're starting to list everything we've done, so each time when we meet, we can kind of say, here's where we are, and we begin to move things from the maybe to a little bit more certainty, and then at some point we'll have to essentially vote on item by item by item. So
I think that's an important point. If we use closing the gaps as an example, the group really pretty much decided on the goals by about the point we are now. But over the next several months, there were a lot of really critical, nuanced changes that led to much better goals, in the final analysis than we had at this point. So I think as we go forward and you think about your specific strategies.
I agree today. We're going to make a statement. We'll work on what exactly that's going to say.
Yeah.
We're running out of our time today. Which I think we had another very good discussion. Our next meeting is on October 9th from 10 to 2. I have had some discussions with David around, we've got a scheduled November meeting. We have the convening of the Board of Regents and presidents, chancellors, et cetera, in the 21st of November. And I know some of us are going to participate or will be there on the 21st of November. We do not have any meetings scheduled for December, January, so we need to begin to think about what does this look like going out to next July. David, you'd mentioned to me the possibility of actually having some regional meetings, and I don't know what type of timeline or how we would want to organize to do that.
Well, I think that's something we need to talk some about. I think it's important to get out, and those I would think of as perhaps not the entire group going to every region, but maybe subsets of the committee going out, sort of laying out what the committee's thinking is at that point, maybe meet at the chambers and bring in folks and just ask for feedback and ideas and invite institutions and here's some of the strategies we're thinking about. And that way you could get out into a lot of communities fairly quickly. We could send staff with you, but you wouldn't all be having to go to every region. I think that would be very difficult for you, and it would be hard to do in the time allocated. But that's something we can talk about more. I just mentioned that and would like your thoughts and feedback in terms of whether that would be helpful.
I'd just like to mention about the time. Excuse me. 9 o'clock meetings in Austin are hard for me. I mean, if I drive it, which I did this time in here, it takes me 45 minutes to get through Austin. And if you fly it, same thing. Got to still get through there. So I'd really urge us to start at 10, not at 9.
Yeah, and I think 9 was unique because of the need for this room to be used for some other purpose.
Yes, our plan was to start at 10, but today we really didn't have the room available to go through.
Right. So hopefully going forward, because I would totally.
Our history is wherever you are in the
don't
state,
start before 10
o'clock. You really can't. Start
we need to start
that.
looking though at dates. If we're going to have a December meeting, we need to lock that down,
we will work with you to set up some dates, and we will send a calendar out to them.
And then the concept of these regional meetings, I think we can discuss that in November. but we need to think how that would be organized. How could we be effective in doing that? And what are we talking about? Metroplex, Houston, San Antonio,
San Antonio, the Valley, El Paso, probably.
So maybe 5 or 6,
and maybe the High Plains.
Right.
And I think that would be it. Lubbock.
Yeah. Yes, Ramon.
Can we get the information on November 21st through an email with
We will send
details?
that to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mary, let's make sure we get that out. If not today, tomorrow.
Right. And it's 2 days, but as I understand, the first day is really kind of mandatory education for the regents and those that are the governmental appointees.
So it would be the second day that really...
The second day is really more of a policy discussion day, and that would be where...
it's the 20th and 21st. So
it's a Thursday and Friday in November.
And typically, we'll have a very good speaker the night before, so that would be, you could choose whether or not to come then or not, and we'll provide you with all the information and can help you with the details. In fact, with that, we need to do some additional planning, but we'd probably like to ask a few of you to participate in that meeting. In terms of, because we would like to lay out some of your thoughts and get some feedback and invite some of the same speakers in to join with that group. So if in the next couple of days you have some ideas of some speakers you've heard that you think would be particularly helpful to speak to that group, we'd appreciate that feedback.
Yeah. And for October, as far as external...
For October, we have the author of Degrees of Inequality, Metzler, she's from, I believe, Syracuse University, who one of her main themes is some concerns with for profits, and we've invited, I don't know if he's agreed to come, the president of DeVry out of Chicago, who's very good speaker, and so to sort of give you the contrast, because that's getting a little bit more into possible strategy issues in terms of to what extent should Texas really employ the for-profit sector and encourage the for-profit sector.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. If not, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
We mentioned something too. Jerry was concerned.